Twilight has fallen on the streets, and the sound of panting breaths can be heard along the deserted streets. A blonde-haired man runs down the alley and turns around, saying he shouldn't have put himself in such a situation. He stops for a moment and turns around, trying to determine if he is being followed. Hearing no footsteps behind him, the man sighed with relief, thinking he had managed to escape. He had barely finished speaking when a knife was placed under his throat. The pursuer silently approached him and took him by surprise. Watching the people pass at the end of the alley, the blond man said he would give them all his money if they let him go. However, the pursuer is inflexible and orders the man to die. At this point, the unknown person finishes their work. A few hours later, a normal morning arrives. A 17-year-old student from Shinjokai High School goes to school yawning, looking sleepy, saying he wants to sleep. The brunette is a contract killer, so he says he shouldn't have gone to school right after a night shift. However, he cannot go home because the school is already right in front of him. The students were already gathered in his classroom, waiting for classes to begin. The boy casually opens the classroom door. His classmates turn around to look at him, but the boy pays no attention and enters the classroom without greeting anyone. Class representative and football club member Mito Shuji approaches Shinjo and greets him. Shinjo briefly returns the greeting from the brown-haired man and sits down in his place. Mito remains standing, his hand raised next to the brunette who has his head in his hands. A pink-haired girl named Nagase Reina claims that Shinjo is behaving very badly as usual. She asks the class representative why he is trying to talk to her, and he replies that Shinjo, no matter what happens, remains their classmate. The class representative notices that the brunette has already fallen asleep, leading Nagase to say that the guy is completely tactless. The classroom door opens and a tall man with brown hair and pierced ears enters the room. Nagase turns to him and tells him that an even worse version of his classmate has arrived. The guy with the piercing is called Arashi Shunsuke, and he is known in the neighborhood as the leader of the thugs. The two boys get up from their seats and greet Arashi in unison, wishing him good morning. The man greets them with a smile and begins to look around him. He notices Shinjo asleep at the back of the classroom and can't help but approach. Stopping near the brunette's desk, he calls out to her. However, Shinjo pays no attention to her and continues to sleep. Arashi claims that the boy should answer when called, and that if he continues to sleep, he will get into trouble. But despite his words, Shinjo continues to sleep, so Arashi reaches out to him. Before the hand has time to reach its target, another hand intercepts it. Arashi looks ahead of her in surprise and even a little fear, and doesn't understand what happened. Meanwhile, Shinjo looks up from his desk and yawns. The man looks at Arashi with his bright purple eyes and asks him what he wants from him. Shaitan starts to get angry and yells at Shinjo to let go of his hand. For a moment, the brunette seemed to be thinking about something, which prompted him to squeeze Arashi's hand more tightly. However, he quickly regains his composure and lets his classmate go, apologizing. As soon as the grip loosened, Arashi quickly withdrew his hand and took a step back. Rubbing his wrist, the brown-haired man declared that Shinjo was a strange guy. At that moment, a young girl with blonde hair and green eyes named Kanzaki Rin asked them to be quiet. Arashi turns to her and asks if Kanzaki has decided to be insolent towards him too. However, the path to the top beauty in the class is blocked by another girl with black hair braided into a high ponytail. The girl's name is Hashimoto Mirai, and she is a member of the disciplinary committee. She therefore orders Arashi to calm down before he breaks the rules. A blonde man with a piercing named Narumi Rhea told the girl to calm down, because anyway, no one would pay attention to her. Shinjo decides not to get involved in this argument, so he puts his head on the desk and goes back to sleep. Arashi is furious about the whole situation, but decides not to make it worse, so she sits down at her desk and puts her feet on the table. The students took their seats and the class remained silent for a moment. Kanzaki sighed with relief and turned to his book. Hashimoto continued to argue with Narumi, who was sitting opposite her. The class representative was chatting happily with Nagase. It was the first year of the second year at Kagura High School. In this class, such scenes of conflict are commonplace. Therefore, Shinjo doesn't pay much attention to it and continues to focus on his own concerns. Suddenly, the brunette feels something strange, so she opens her eyes. He notices that a strange stain has appeared under Chief Mito's feet. Soon, the stain grew larger and transformed into a magical pentagram. Light began to flood the classroom, which frightened the students who were there. The teenagers stared at the glistening floor in horror, trying to understand what was happening. Some students got up from their seats, but others remained seated at their desks, afraid to move. Mito looked down and asked his classmates if they knew what was going on. However, as class representative, He decides to deal with this later and therefore asks his classmates to leave the classroom immediately. Despite his words, Shinjo does not move, because he understands that they will not have time to leave. The pentagram began to shine brighter and brighter, and eventually filled the entire room with its light. The school children lose consciousness and move around the space, eventually finding themselves in a large hall with columns. Shinjo is the first to regain his senses and, standing up, he looks around to try to understand where they are. They are in a stone building reinforced by enormous columns, so he only has one hypothesis. As difficult as it may seem, the white light of the pentagram absorbed them and transported them somewhere. At that point, the others begin to regain their senses and ask where they have landed. Nagase looks around and asks what that white light was. Mito urges the guys to calm down. He too doesn't know what happened, but he wants to make sure no one was hurt. Shinjo looked at the leader approvingly, thinking that Mito had managed to calm even those who were on the verge of panicking. Arasi, for his part, says he is not going to waste time on such trivialities. Unhappy that the village chief did not want to resolve the problem first, he decided to leave with his friends. Shinjo understands Arashi's zeal, but still asks him to stop. The man stops and asks Shinjo what he wants. Shinjo replies that he hears footsteps outside the door, as if someone is approaching. Only after that did the classmates actually hear the footsteps and turn their gaze toward the door. Shinjo hears the footsteps and realizes that a man and a woman are approaching them. The brunette is interested in the intentions that lead them to come and see them, and it is at that moment that the door opens. A man with gray hair and a full beard, and a young girl with long white hair appear before the school children. The girl recounts that the boys managed to keep their cool, which was expected of hero candidates. The school children are amazed by her beauty and think that the man and the girl look like a knight and a princess from the Middle Ages. Shinjo hid behind a column and thought that these people were not cosplayers because a particular atmosphere reigned around them. Looking at the young girl, the brunette thinks there's nothing special about her. The young girl claims to be Leonora, Archbishop of the sacred land of Digris, and the man next to her is her night guy. Arashi points his finger at the girl and says she is spouting unimaginable nonsense. Despite the rudeness, the young girl continues to smile and claims to understand their point of view. Mito steps forward and apologizes, explaining that they themselves don't understand how they got to this point and are therefore disoriented. The village chief politely asks the strangers what is happening here. The young girl happily announces that she came here precisely for that purpose. The archbishop decided not to delay and therefore answered their question briefly. She explains that the boys were summoned to another world because they represent humanity's hope of overthrowing the demon king. Mito claims that her words are hard to believe, and Arashi continues to complain that the girl is talking nonsense. The knight began to get irritated by his words and ordered Arashi to be quiet, for before him stood the saint of their country. The brown-haired man ordered the old man to be quiet or he would kill him. The knight takes a fighting stance and replies that the boy will only understand his place after experiencing pain. Leonora asks him to stop, but the man insists they must show Arashi where his place is now. Shinjo watches from behind a column as Arashi charges the knight. The brunette thinks the guy is very brave, since he threw himself at the man with the sword without thinking. Meanwhile, Arashi tells himself that he has already fought armed men, so he must dodge the first blow and strike from below. Night Guy is watching him and preparing to counterattack. In an instant, a flash of lightning crossed Arashi's field of vision, freezing him in place. Blood begins to flow from the cut on his forehead, and the knight asks the boy if he will continue. The class froze in surprise because no one had time to notice the movement of the sword in the knight's hands. Leonora sighs and asks if that is enough for the man, then asks him to put away his sword. The girl apologizes for the rough reception and assures the boys that they never meant to hurt them. She looks at the silent school children and says that she is going to reveal to them the reason for their presence in this world. Leonora states that she will hide nothing from them and that she will tell them everything in every detail. To begin with, she asks them to remain silent. Leonora explains that in this world, humanity is under invasion by the Demon King and is on the verge of extinction. Their sacred land of Digris continues to resist. However, despite all their efforts, they are unable to fully resist the invaders. Shinjo listens to the story, standing in the shade of a column, and thinks that the story of the Demon King is quite classic. For all of humanity, these school children, who are true heroes in the making, represent the last hope. Mito hesitantly asks if they mean they must defeat the Demon King. Narumi claims that it's impossible, and Hashimoto adds that they never fought. The young girl turns around and says that not everyone is capable of simply enduring this situation. Hashimoto observes one of her classmates crying and begging to be taken back to her world. The knight replies that the boys must do it, however impossible it may seem. He claims that their only way to return home is to defeat the Demon King. His words frighten many school children who say they cannot believe them. Shinjo doesn't understand if they are lying or telling the truth, but he assumes that the knight is trying to prepare them for the worst. Despite this, people who have lived their lives without worrying about the consequences will not be ready to commit murder, as it requires experience and talent. Arashi smiled mockingly and declared that these people had called them to save their lives, but they didn't care about their opinions. He asked Leonora and the knight if they really believe the boys will obey them silently. Arashi looks at the man angrily and asks him why he is looking at him like that. For his part, the knight believes that the young man is a promising fighter because he has not lost his fighting spirit. This man believes that this could make Arashi a serious threat in the future, and therefore plans to get rid of him immediately. Before the knight could draw his sword, Leonora touched Arashi's face. The girl casts a spell, and the wound on the young man's forehead heals. Leonora declares in front of the boys that they are guilty and asks for their forgiveness for all their sins. The light emanating from the girl moves towards Arashi and Nagashi, who stands apart and asks what kind of light it is. Leonora replies that she took advantage of the miraculous power granted to her by the god Digris, who temporarily establishes a new law in the world. Realizing that the school children are not very familiar with their world, the girl explains that in their world, this is called magic. His words lead Shinjo to believe that these people are well versed in their culture and that this is therefore not their first call. After finishing treating Arashi, Leonora heads towards Mito. Raising her luminous hand towards her head, she declares that magic is the main reason for their presence here. When the hand touches Mito's head, his body seems to tremble. Suddenly, the chief's hands began to glow, which caused Nagas, who was standing nearby, to close his eyes. After a few moments, the light emanating from Mito's hand transformed into a sword, whose blades shone with an intense blue. Leonora claimed that her miraculous power could awaken the power of blessing in hero candidates. The girl claims that this power is granted to her randomly and that she cannot change it. Leonora apologizes for the selfish nature of their intentions, but asks the boys to lend them a hand. Mito argues that no matter how much power they are given, it will not make the boys more effective in combat. Leonora says that students will have to undergo training, but the country promises to take full responsibility for it. Mito understands that they have no other choice, so as class representative, he asks the boys to listen to him. He states that for their own survival, what they need most right now is protection and knowledge. The old man suggests listening to strangers, because in an emergency, a blessing might save their lives. After listening to their classmate's speech, his classmates approved of his point of view. Leonora was pleased with their decision, and with their permission, she began to give the boys God's blessing. Hashimoto Mirai, having received a blessing, was able to move objects in the air, thus acquiring the power of telekinesis. Arashi was very pleased with his power. He began to control the force of the explosion. The students were interested in learning more about their new skills. Some people were unable to unlock the secret of their power at first. When Leonora had finished her blessing, she looked at the school children and asked them if they had all received their gift. At that moment, Shinjo decided to step out of the shadows and raised his hand, declaring that he was the only one left. The young girl approached the brunette and apologized for not having noticed him sooner. When Leonora touched Shinjo, lightning began to appear before her eyes. The boy's eyes turned red, and he began to feel that something was wrong with his vision. As Shinjo looked at Leonora, a panel appeared before his eyes containing all the information concerning the girl. At first, the girl did not understand what had happened, but after a moment of reflection, she assumed that the boy had acquired the ability to evaluate. Shinjo asked what that meant, and the girl replied that with this power, one could learn details about the strength and skills of a chosen target. The man reflected on his words, raised his hand in front of him, and looked at it. Shinjo's skill chart appeared before him, and he compared it to the one in the game. Suddenly, his gaze was drawn to a movement coming from behind him. The next moment, Arashi landed next to Shinjo and crashed to the ground, causing an explosion. However, the brunette was no longer in her previous location. Feeling threatened, Shinjo jumped to the side. At the point of impact, a hole appeared in the stone floor. Arashi raised his fist, which was giving off heat, and asked Shinjo how he was doing with his new power. He mocked the brunette, saying he had received a power that allowed him to change the color of her eyes. His classmates liked his joke, so they started laughing at Shinjo together. Nagas stated that they were delighted to find that this guy had a useless talent because he always acted arrogantly. Shinjo's eye color returned, and he thought that the boys were celebrating too soon, because it was still unknown how useful their abilities would be. Just as they receive powers, they can be taken away at any time. But despite this, Shinjo remains an assassin. Leonora interrupts them and explains that the boys are still having trouble controlling them, but that after a while their powers will help them defeat the Demon King. The girl thinks the school children are tired, so she suggests they rest that day. That evening, each of the students who had become candidates for the role of hero was taken away and assigned to a different room. Finding himself alone in his room, Shinjo decided to go out the window and gather more information about this world. Two people were patrolling the area and discussing the reasons for the increased security. One of the guards spotted the boys and now doubts that they are capable of protecting themselves. The second guard tries to calm her colleague and tells her that this is a sacred mission, so she must have a plan. Shinjo was secretly listening to their conversation in the shade of a tree. While the brunette stood under the tree, he noticed the third patrol, which confirmed their statements regarding increased security. Shinjo decides to take a look over the tree and use his power as a guard. According to the information on the card, the brunette learns that the man named Dan only possesses first-level fencing skills. Shinjo decides to go further and thinks that if the guards had miraculous powers, they would certainly have caught him. The brunette decides to walk around the neighborhood to understand exactly where he is. After a while, he more or less understood the geography of the area around the castle and described it as a typical fortified town. Shinjo stops near the entrance of the main castle and notices that it is guarded by two people. Hidden in the bushes, the brunette reflects on the situation inside the castle and the difficulty he will have in entering it while security is reinforced. Shinjo thinks there's no need to rush at the moment, so he decides to go home. Meanwhile, three girls from her class gathered in the meadow, finding the place pleasant and spacious. One of the girls thinks they might upset the owners, but the other reassures her by saying they only came to practice. The instigator was Nagase, who couldn't sleep, and she said it would be useful, and if they were caught, they would blame everything on Hashimoto. The girls decided to begin training. One controlled plants, another water, and Nagase fire. Shinjo spotted them on his way to his room and decided to observe them from the side. The supposed divine blessing makes Shinjo uneasy, so he decides to observe the girls from a distance. At one point, the man tenses up, feeling as if he is being watched. He turns around and looks behind him, trying to understand what caused this feeling. One of the girls noticed a strange movement in the bushes and asked what was going on. Her words attracted the attention of the other girls, and now each of them looked fearfully towards the bushes. As if sensing he had been unmasked, a lizard-like monster emerged from the tall grass. The girls screamed in fear, trying to understand what was in front of them. On the other side is Shinjo, who has also never seen such a beast. The brunette decides to use his power to assess this creature. Shinjo discovers that he is facing a male Val lizard, whose appearance in front of the girls caused astonishment. The lizard, which had remained seated calmly until then, raised its head and inhaled. The next moment, he let out a menacing yell that deafened the girls. The girls were scared and screamed, then they ran away. The lizards sensed their fear and rushed at the victims. The girls fled into the tall grass to try and escape the monster. Shinjo jumped onto the rock and thought that the lizard was aggressive because it attacked people without hesitation. Observing the monster, the brunette noticed that it moved quickly on all fours, but in a linear fashion, and that it was not particularly intelligent. The lizard looks big, but if you use a knife, that will probably help. Shinjo took a knife out of his jacket sleeve and threw it towards the lizard. The dagger pierced the creature's scales, making it scream in pain. However, the knife did not remain embedded in the beast's body and fell to the ground, forcing the creature to turn around. Shinjo hid behind the tree again and thought that his plan had worked, even though he hadn't done much harm to the lizard. The girls, meanwhile, continued trying to escape the creature. Looking back, Nagase hadn't noticed the small pebble under her foot and had tripped. One of the girls turned around to help her fallen friend, but the second grabbed her arm, preventing her from turning back. Nagase injured herself when she fell and sat on the ground, rubbing her bruised head. However, she was distracted by heavy breathing near her ear. Turning around, she saw a huge lizard, motionless above her and sniffing. The girl screamed in fear, but she realized there was nothing she could do. Nagase froze on the spot when the lizard's leg rose above his head. The young girl prepared for the blow by covering her face with her hands. A few seconds later, nothing happened, and when she opened her eyes, the girl saw a lizard lying on the ground with a dagger stuck in its head. Fear brought tears to the girl's eyes. She looked in surprise at the dead creature right in front of her, which a second before had almost killed her. Seeing that the danger had passed, The friends ran to Nagase to help him get up. The young girl looked at the dagger and asked what had happened and who had saved her. The friends decide to leave the area quickly to avoid encountering another monster. After waiting a while, Shinjo said there was no particular reason to kill the lizard, but if it had simply left, it would not have been possible to sleep well. When the girls disappeared from his sight, the brunette approached the monster and took his knives. But at one point, he again had the feeling that someone was watching him. Shinjo hid behind the lizard's body, then cautiously peered out of his cover. Not far from him on the lawn stood a large stone, behind which a barely perceptible rustling could be heard. Shinjo remained in ambush for a moment, waiting for the intruder to appear. However, no one showed up, so the man decided it was time for him to leave too. In the blink of an eye, Shinjo ran off the lawn. For a moment, silence reigned in the street. As Shinjo disappeared from the scene, a figure wrapped in a dark cloak emerged from behind the column. The stranger approached the lizard and stepped on its head, crushing it. He said he was very disappointed by the candidates for the title of hero. However, one of them still interested him because of its similar smell. The monster, which was still on the field, was discovered by the guards, and the next morning, it was shown to the hero candidates. The school children stared at the unknown creature with fear. Night Guy told the boys that last night, this monster was wandering near the ramparts of the capital. Mito looked at the strange creature in perplexity. Arashi and his friends also examined the unknown monster. One of the girls in the class burst into tears because she was afraid that such monsters existed. Guy explains that the monsters are the Demon King's henchmen, and that their main targets are therefore the hero candidates. At that time, the monster was examined by a man named Steady, who concluded that there were traces of witchcraft on the creature, and that a demon of an intermediate or even higher level had acted upon it. Shinjo once again hides from prying eyes behind a column, and hears Steady suggest that the enemy has decided to assess the situation. Shinjo hears that people are talking about witchcraft differently this time, and thinks that it might be different from miraculous power. Mito listened attentively to his elders, and asked them if the monster was really controlled by a demon. Steady claims that this man is right, because powerful demons can control monsters and use slavery magic to achieve this. The scientist explains that the monsters emerge from living organisms, and that the source of their power is the evil emanating from the Demon King. Night Guy thinks it's time for them to leave, and leads Steady away from the students. Shinjo thought that the scientist could be used in the future to gather information. However, the main problem right now is that the monster was being controlled by someone. Looking back, Shinjo remembers that the monster's card indicated that it had a subordinate status. The brunette suspects that when he felt someone's gaze, it could very well have been a demon. Shinjo thinks the demon is clever, since it was difficult to notice, but this could mean that it is still lurking somewhere. From behind, the brunette begins to feel psychological pressure. A strange voice in his head asks him if Shinjo is afraid of his imminent death. The boy froze on the spot and heard the demon say that he had nothing to be afraid of. At that moment, Arashi declares that they must defeat the Demon King, as he does not intend to stay in this world for long. Kanzaki supports him, stating that this guy is right at least sometimes. Mito agrees with them, because if they want to go home, they have no other choice. Some students do not share their opinions because they are afraid of monsters. Shinjo thinks these guys have become bold because this world is like a game. But despite that, war is still war, and so they will have to kill. At that moment, Leonora approached them and told them they shouldn't be in such a rush. The young girl reminds them that they do not yet fully control their powers, and that they must therefore first undergo training. Leonora explained that the boys had been summoned to this world as hero candidates, which explained their slower progress compared to the local inhabitants. A whole week has therefore passed since the start of training. Shinjo, sitting alone in the library, wonders why they can communicate with the locals without a language barrier. The brunette turns her gaze towards the window, from which noises are coming. His classmates train on the field, learning the specifics of their abilities. Since expertise was not the most appropriate blessing in combat, Shinjo was forbidden from participating in training, but was given access to the library. The man remembers Leonora's words that knowledge is also power. After that, the whole class started laughing at Shinjo. The man gets up from the table and reflects on the fact that, despite his efforts, he still hasn't managed to find a single book on demons. Under the guidance of the knights, the students split into pairs and competed against each other. Shinjo went outside and watched them from the sidelines, thinking the boys were making giant strides. Among all the students, the brunette singled out 5, including Narumi, who had the ability to control the wind. In second place, we find Arashi, thanks to his explosive power and perseverance in training. The third was Kanzaki, who had the power to force her opponent to obey her orders. The fourth is Hashimoto and his ability to manipulate terrestrial rocks. Nagas, capable of manipulating fire, closes the list of the strongest. Besides these five people, there is another who has surpassed them all. At that precise moment, the sword was snatched from the knight's hands and flew in the opposite direction. This exceptional student fought the knight and managed to disarm him. The knight gave in, acknowledging that this man was truly exceptional, for he had already become stronger than him. This exceptional student became the class president, Mito. The boy looked at the knight with a smile and thanked him for his instructions. Shinjo uses his power on Mito and notices that his strength has increased at an unimaginable speed. Even if the elderly person is a genius, this is an unimaginable leap forward, which may indicate that divine blessing is not limited to the acquisition of abilities, but also acts on the body. It was decided to take a break, and so the students began to leave the training field. Noticing Shinjo standing at the edge of the precipice, they started laughing at them, telling him to read books since he didn't know how to fight. The brunette paid no attention to their mocking. Shinjo had noticed for a long time that the entire class had begun to despise him. He believes this was caused by the rise of their influence. One of his classmates contacts Shinjo to tell him not to ignore him, since they are friends. Without her classmates noticing, the brunette girl knocked the boy to the ground. His classmate didn't have time to understand what had happened before he found himself lying on the ground. Shinjo asked him what had happened and if he was hurt. Some looked at the man on the ground in surprise, while others looked at him with a smile. The victim was about to fight with Shinjo, but Arashi stopped him, saying that Leonora was approaching them. The young girl left the building accompanied by her knight. With a smile on her face, Leonora approached the training ground. Students immediately turned towards her, and the knights who were participating in the training knelt down. Leonora thanked them for their attention. The girl congratulated the boys on their success, noting that their progress was so rapid that it surprised everyone. Consequently, it was decided to accelerate the training program. The boys were afraid they would be sent to fight the Demon King immediately, but Leonora reassured them. She stated that it was time to move from training to practice, meaning to face a real monster. The students reflected on his words. The girls, who had already come face to face with the monster, seemed frightened. At that moment, a smile lit up Shinjo's face, as he wished to assess his classmates' abilities in a real-life situation. After some time, a group of students, led by Leonora and the knight, entered the forest where the training was to take place. Guy said they couldn't move around in a large group because it would only hinder them. He gave the order to split into teams of 2 or 3 people. Nagase calmly welcomed the idea and invited Mito to join her. Another girl also asked to join their team. 2 of his imitators asked to join Arashi's team, claiming that he was the strongest among them. According to the draw, Narumi ended up on Hashimoto's team, which upset the young girl. Night Guy looked at the students and asked them if they had all formed teams. His gaze was drawn to Shinjo and Kanzaki, who were standing apart from the others. The young girl was upset that no one had invited her to join their team. His classmates didn't dare do it because they were very afraid of Kanzaki. The girl paid them no attention and suggested that Shinjo ally with her, which the boy accepted. Observing Kanzaki, the brunette thinks that this girl is very self-assured and cold, and that she will not let anyone stand in her way. The girl hadn't paid any attention to Shinjo until then, but feeling his gaze, she turned around. She asked him why he was looking at her so strangely, but Shinjo told her not to worry about it. When the boy turned away, the girl turned her attention to the mentors. Leonora wished everyone good luck and stated that the team that defeated the most monsters would receive a special reward. On the mentor's instructions, training began and the teams separated. Shinjo and Kanzaki were on the same team, but the boy still preferred to stay a little apart. The girl stated that her blessing was much stronger than that of her classmates, and that Shinjo should therefore not step on her toes. The brunette calmly accepted his statement and said that he trusted Kanzaki. The girl interpreted his behavior as a lack of pride on the part of the boy and continued on her way. Shinjo decided to step aside and assess Kanzaki's fighting potential. While the young girl crossed the forest carefree, the brunette already sensed where the monsters were. Based on his observations, 4 monsters were following him, and he decided to surround them. Suddenly, a small goblin emerged from the bushes opposite Kanzaki. The young girl stopped, visibly surprised to see him appear. The monster ran towards the girl, brandishing a club. Kanzaki did not lose his composure and extended his hand, ordering the monster to fall. Submitting to the controlling force, the goblin fell to the ground. Shinjo stayed behind the girl and carefully observed what was happening. Kenzaki's power turned out to be control, allowing her to force others to do what she wanted. Shinjo told the girl that there were other monsters in the area. The girl heard him and ordered the goblin to drop his weapon. When the monster had carried out the order, she ordered it to keep its hands behind its back. Shinjo noticed that the girl seemed tired, to which she replied that prolonged use of the blessing was exhausting. Turning around, the brunette ordered Kenzaki to quickly deal with the monster before the others arrived. The girl looked at the crying goblin and said she couldn't do it because he looked like a child. Shinjo replied that it didn't matter. Since he had attacked them, he was therefore considered their enemy. The boy's words convinced Kanzaki, but she was in no hurry to kill the goblin. Shinjo picked up a stone from the ground, thinking that even after receiving powers, the girl remained an ordinary and confused schoolgirl. While throwing the stone he was holding in his hand, the boy thought that the most important thing was for Kanzaki to make the right decision in the face of danger. At that moment, other goblins began to emerge from behind the bushes. 3 monsters smiled at them, revealing their sharp teeth. Kanzaki heard them and turned around. Shinjo called to the girl, telling her that the rest of the monsters had come out into the light. After these words, the girl held out her other hands and ordered everyone to throw themselves to the ground. His control extended to these monsters as well, forcing them to lie flat on the ground. Shinjo noticed that Kanzaki was starting to get out of breath and asked her what she was going to do next. The girl asked the boy if he was going to help her, but Shinjo reminded her that she had told him not to interfere in her affairs. Kanzaki swore and declared that she would kill them, because that was exactly what the man expected of her. The girl gestured with her hand, ordering the goblins to wring their necks. Trembling with fear, the goblins buried their heads in their hands. Unable to resist the grip of control, the monsters committed suicide. When the goblins died, the girl released her grip and caught her breath. Shinjo was surprised that Kanzaki had treated them that way, and the girl explained that it wouldn't work against a stronger opponent. The girl covered her mouth with her hand and said that this was not how she imagined participating in a real fight. Shinjo reminded him that they were the ones who had attacked them, which made them enemies, whether they were monsters or humans. The man calmly contemplates the corpses of the monsters and declares that the girl can act differently if she wishes to die herself. Kanzaki looks at him in surprise and asks him why he remains so calm when he has practically no strength. Shinjo examines the goblins' bodies and states that one of his strengths is that he is not easily timid. The brunette asks what they will do next because if Kanzaki is scared, then they can turn back. After speaking with Shinjo, the girl seemed to regain her senses and looked at the goblins' bodies. Turning away, she said they needed to keep training. Observing the young girl, Shinjo thought that she was stubborn, but that she had a stable psyche, so it was possible to work with her. As they ventured deeper into the forest, Kanzaki said she was curious to know how the others' training was going. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest, the sounds of running can be heard. Hashimoto and Narumi are running from something while thinking about what they should do. Narumi decides to stop running and stops. The man decides to make the most of what he has, so he harnesses the power of the wind. Hashimoto gave in to his zeal and lifted a large stone into the air using his power. They pooled their strengths and acted as a team. Thanks to this, the large stone was lifted by the air current and thrown towards the monster. The stone crashed against the monster, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The monster had a head that resembled the face of a large red-striped bear. The monster's body was covered in red plates, with a hardness comparable to that of armor. Large claws were visible on the paws. Narumi fell to the ground, terrified, asking what they should do next. The boys did not understand how they could possibly face a huge armored bear. At that moment, Kanzaki remembers that she was raised by her grandfather, whom she had promised to make happy, and that she must therefore return. The young girl fears that her disappearance may have saddened him. Shinjo said that if they continued straight ahead, they might get lost, but the girl replied that that wouldn't happen. The man told her that she hadn't stayed in the woods long enough to really believe him. Kanzaki, irritated by his words, ordered him to be quiet. The girl looked at Shinjo, wondering what kind of boy he was, because he had seemed frightening to her before. The brunette looked around her, but noticed that they were looking at him. He asked the girl why she was looking at him, and she immediately looked away. Suddenly, a piercing woman's scream echoed through the forest. The team looked in the direction from which the sound was coming, and Kanzaki stated that it was Hashimoto's voice. Shinjo assumed the girl was in trouble and asked her what they were going to do. Kanzaki heads towards the noise, saying they should help and hoping the girl isn't hurt. Shinjo waited for the girl to approach and declared that she was surprisingly kind. Perplexed by his words, the young girl asked Shinjo what he had thought of her before. A second later, Kenzaki said it didn't matter and went to the rescue. At that moment, Hashimoto was thrown to the ground by the monster's paws. Narumi positioned herself on the other side of the girl and asked her if she was all right. The girl's face was covered in bruises and her forehead was bleeding, but she replied that she was fine and told the boy to run away. Narumi did not listen to her and ran towards her, intending to help the girl get up. But at that precise moment, a great shadow loomed over them. Turning around, Narumi saw the monster raise its paw above them, ready to strike. Before the monster struck, Kenzaki's voice was heard ordering the monster to stop. The monster's paw was seized by an invisible force, forcing it to stop. The creature screamed because it could not control its actions. Kenzaki stood in front of Narumi and Hashimoto, blocking the view of his classmates. The man thanked the young girl for saving him, but she replied that she could not hold him for long. Shinjo followed the girl out of the forest. He observed Kenzaki's actions and asked Narumi if Hashimoto was alive. The man did not leave the unconscious girl and stated that she had been seriously injured, but was still breathing. Shinjo turned his back on them and ordered Narumi to take Hashimoto and run away. The blond man refused, claiming he couldn't leave them alone. However, Shinjo insisted, asking him if he wanted Hashimoto to be left to die slowly. After saying these words, he put the girl on his back and was about to leave when Shinjo asked him to find and call Mito or Leonora. When the silhouette of the boy and girl disappeared from her sight, the brunette looked at the monster. The creature was still immobilized by Kenzaki, but continued to resist. Approaching a little closer, Shinjo used his sense of observation. According to the capabilities chart, the man learned that they were facing an armored bear. The monster possessed amazing skills, particularly in defense, and also had the status of a mutant, which greatly intrigued the brunette. Shinjo examined the bear and realized that he could not pierce its fur and tusks. At that moment, Kenzaki's voice was heard, declaring that she could no longer control herself. The next moment, the mutant managed to escape the girl's control. Shinjo stated that they had bought enough time for Narumi and Hashimoto, and that they now needed to escape themselves. Kenzaki nodded and turned away. However, the next moment she collapsed to the ground, visibly frightened by something. The girl was trembling and told Shinjo that she couldn't feel her legs anymore. Meanwhile, the monster chose the young girl as its victim and headed towards her. Shinjo realized the situation was serious, so he began searching for something in his cloak. Smelling the gas canister, the man removed the pin and threw it at the monster. The space began to fill with smoke, hiding Kenzaki from the monster's view. Taking advantage of the situation, Shinjo hid in the shade of a tree. Kenzaki didn't have time to realize that she was in the boy's arms. She was about to say something, but Shinjo ordered her to be quiet if she didn't want to draw attention to herself. The brunette woman placed the young girl on the ground and began to observe the monster. When the mutant had moved far enough away, Kenzaki asked him what that smoke was. Shinjo claimed it was just an ordinary smoke bomb he made out of boredom during the boy's training. But that was a lie. The brunette came into the world with his own weapons, namely a smoke bomb, 2 knives, and a pistol, but he never wanted to use them again. Kenzaki apologized to Shinjo for wanting to save Narumi and Hashimoto, but in the end, it was she who needed saving. The brunette said it was pointless for her to apologize, but that she could simply thank him. The young girl agreed with him and thanked him for his help. Shinjo said that if the girl was always this polite, people would be attracted to her. Kenzaki became angry and wanted to say something, but the brunette reminded him that the monster was still very close. The girl asked what they were going to do next, and Shinjo replied that there was no point in running away. The monster looked around and turned towards the noise. He finally managed to find some people. Standing before him was Mito with his team, who declared that he was now his opponent. The old man used his blessing and summoned a sword that protects against evil. Thus began the battle between the mutant with the strongest defense and the best of the hero candidates. The girls from Team Mito stayed away. The old man brandished his sword and rushed at the monster. The genetically modified bear has also begun attacking humans. Mito skillfully dodged the first blow and entered the monster's blind spot. Gripping the sword firmly with both hands, Mito put all his strength into it. The next moment, a barely perceptible flash of light crossed the sky. Mito struck with great speed and force, injuring the mutant's paw. The blow should have caused more damage, which would have allowed the elderly person to assess the skin's resistance. At that moment, Nagase covered Mito from behind and told him to step aside. Using her power, the girl sent a fireball towards the mutant. Although the monster's fur was tough, it was still made of flammable materials. The young girl displayed a smug smile, stating that she had expected it from the beginning. Mito leaped away from the monster and congratulated Nagase on his work. But contrary to their expectations, the fire quickly went out without causing significant damage to the animal. Their actions only served to further enrage the bear. The mocking smile disappeared from Nagasi's face, and she now appeared frightened. Mito ordered the girl to remain calm. The old man noticed that after Nagasi's attack, the beast had noticeably slowed down. Mito is convinced that all three of them can defeat him. The main thing is not to rush. His words gave the girls confidence and allowed them to believe in themselves. The boys took turns hitting the beast until it was exhausted. At that moment, the demon Delphis, who had been observing Shinjo earlier, was looking at them sideways. He declared with a mocking smile that it was only a matter of time before these children died. Delphis realized that the armored bear would not defeat them. He was amazed by the speed of their development and the calmness of some of them. Mito particularly caught her attention. The demon pulled out a dagger and thought that previously he had wanted to assess the situation, but now he had decided to kill Mito on the spot. Meanwhile, the class representative continued to hit the bear. The mutant was injured and his movements were now limited. Mito told the girls to finish. The village chief dealt the bear the fatal blow. The demon thought that the boys should take this lesson with him to the other world. The lesson to be learned is that after killing an enemy, you must not let your guard down. The demon was already preparing to leap out of the bushes and strike Mito in the back, but something froze him in place. While the demon was distracted, someone stealthily approached him and put a knife to his throat. Shinjo stood behind Delphis, his eyes glowing red. The demon was perplexed, and the brunette told him to remember that one should never let one's guard down before killing. Delphis had no choice but to throw the dagger to the ground. The demon raised his hands, showing that he surrendered. Delphis looked around him, incredulous that he had been caught off guard. He had no intention of giving up and was already thinking about an escape plan. As if he could read the demon's intentions, Shinjo stabbed him in the legs. The demon lost his balance and fell to the ground. He let out a groan of pain, but Shinjo ordered him to be quiet so that Mito and his friends wouldn't notice. The brunette said he would let the demon go if he answered all her questions. Delphis, outraged by his words, asked who Shinjo was, that he should be obeyed without question. The brunette then declared that he was a shadow from another world. The demon clenched his teeth in rage against himself. He realized that, all this time, he hadn't felt that unsettling aura coming from Mito, but from this man. Shinjo said he felt like he was being followed, but he couldn't track down the demon. He stated that his plan was to use the Mito as bait. Shinjo explains that he comes from another world and therefore doesn't know much. That's why he wants Delphis to tell him all about demons. The demon sneered and asked if the man really believed they were going to tell him everything. After his words, a loud cracking sound can be heard. The demon screamed in pain from his back. Shinjo stood up and declared that it would be in the demon's best interest to speak. Otherwise, he promises to make Delphis's life a living hell. The demon is suffering, but he thinks this man shouldn't underestimate him. Delphis understands that he will not get out of this alive, so he smiles through gritted teeth. Shinjo guesses what the demon is going to do. Delphis kept a vial of poison in his mouth in case he was tortured. Having surrounded her, the demon signed his own death warrant. Shinjo jumped back, fearing that the poison might be dangerous for him too. The brunette sighed and thought that the Demon King's army was well prepared and would only cause them trouble. Shinjo activates his ability to visualize information about the demon. However, he is distracted by Kanzaki, who comes up behind him and asks if the demon is dead. Shinjo stopped using the blessing and turned his gaze towards the girl who had approached. Kanzaki stared at the dead demon in horror. Shinjo decided to find out what the girl had managed to see. The blonde woman replied that she had arrived just as the demon had fallen. Shinjo explains to him that he is an assassin from the Demon King's army. The armored bear that the boys had fought earlier was under its control. Furthermore, the lizard that attacked Nagase and his friends was under the control of a demon. The girl looked at Shinjo in astonishment and asked him if the demon wanted to kill them. The brunette asserts that it goes without saying that the Demon King would send someone to kill the hero candidates. Kanzaki agrees with him and says that she was naive. However, she wonders how only Shinjo could have noticed the demon. The man decides that it is now pointless to hide the truth from Kanzaki, who has already seen everything. He explains to her that in their world he worked part-time as a hitman, and that's why he sensed the presence of his colleague. Frightened by his words, Kanzaki asks what murders Shinjo is talking about. The brunette says he doesn't care whether the girl believes his words or not, but she sees the corpse with her own eyes. The young girl begins to realize that the main danger now comes from her classmate. Shinjo asks Kanzaki not to tell anyone what she saw today. Their class is already saddened by Hashimoto's injury. His words relax Kanzaki a little, and she agrees with him. She says Shinjo is kind because he is attentive to the feelings of his classmates. The brunette explains this by saying that they are not used to fighting, unlike him. Shinjo heads towards his classmates, glancing at Kensaki. He believes his control powers could be useful to him in the future. After a while, the class gathers in the same place, but Shinjo still remains a little apart. One of the students uses her divine power to cure Hashimoto's. This girl's name is Hano Shiori. She has long black hair and dark gray eyes. She uses her healing power and runs her hand along Hashimoto's body. A soft sunlight emanates from her hand, which she holds against the victim's face. The next moment, the wounds on Hashimoto's body were healing rapidly, without leaving a trace. The classmates gathered around them watched the scene in astonishment. Narumi sits down next to Hano and asks her if Hashimoto is all right. The young girl reassures him, promising that she will be completely cured in an hour. The blonde woman sighed in relief and began to congratulate Mito on defeating such a ferocious monster. The old man confirms that the monster was powerful, but adds that together they can defeat anyone. His words lift the spirits of the class, but Shinjo remains apart. He stands leaning against a tree, his eyes closed, but he can still feel someone's gaze. He asks Kensaki why she is looking at him like that, and the girl immediately turns away. At that moment, Leonora arrives in class accompanied by the night guy. Their presence attracts the attention of the students. After they appear, Mito greets them but seems quite perplexed. Narumi asks them where they've been all this time. Night guy claims that they were watching them closely, and these words angered Narumi. The man explains why they didn't help them by saying that the training wouldn't be effective if they had to intervene constantly. Mito also disapproves of the situation, stating that Hashimoto was in such danger that she could have died. The knight replies that in a real battle, everyone's life is in mortal danger. The boys will face this kind of fight in the future, so Guy recommends they pull themselves together and gather their strength. Mito recounts that Leonora and the knight deceived them by telling them that only weak monsters lived in the forest. Leonora interrupts their conversation and declares that it is most likely the work of a demon slayer. After his words, some students began to whisper fearfully. Leonora explains that there have never been armored bears in this forest, so the demon tried to assess their strength in this way. The knight implies that the demon is still in the forest. Leonora says they will increase security and intensify training. Otherwise, all the guys will be killed. Some students are unhappy with this arrangement. They believe they are already working at the limit. Others tremble with fear at the thought that they could all be killed. Mito claims that all of this is ridiculous because this is their first real fight and the guys are nervous. With a smile on her lips, Leonora replies that the boys will have to go through there, even if it's ridiculous, otherwise they will all be killed. His answer even frightens the class representative. Arashi expresses his displeasure at the fact that they were already summoned against their will and are now being given orders. He was about to get closer to Leonora, but his path was blocked by the night guy. The knight claims that they are merely pawns of Lady Leonora and must therefore obey her orders without question. All these words humiliate them. Arashi becomes angry with the knight and threatens to kill him on the spot, but Mito tries to calm him down. Arashi doesn't understand why the chief is defending these people. Mito justifies his actions by saying that if they harm them, they will become enemies of the entire state and will not be able to survive. The knight calms down a little and promises that as long as the boys obey them, no one will be hurt. Arashi smiled mockingly and asked if they would really become enemies of the country. After that, he decides to challenge them and activates his power. Night Guy did not expect Arashi to decide to engage in open combat. He doesn't have time to react to the attack and sees the flash of an explosion approaching him. Eris's view is obscured by the light from the explosion and a screen of smoke. You can't hear any noise because of the smoke. Arashi clenches his fist and says it was very simple. In an instant, the veil of mist dissipates and a knight appears before him, surrounded by blue light. Arashi doesn't understand how this man managed to escape unharmed. As he looked at the knight in surprise, the latter struck him in the face with his fist. Guy was surrounded by a blue glow, like lightning, and he looked very angry. The force of the blow was such that Arashi was thrown to the side. The man fell to the ground and froze motionless. The blow he received caused his nose to bleed. The students watched in horror as the biggest bully in the class was defeated in a single blow. After giving Arashi a lesson, the knight calmed down a little and declared that this was all the students were capable of. As he left with Leonora, he told the boys to get ready because their training the next day would be more rigorous. His friends immediately rushed to Arashi to help him up, but he pushed them away. The boy had promised himself that he would one day kill that knight. The next day after combat training, the class gathered near the stone building, in front of Leonora and Steady. The man informed them that, on Madame Leonora's orders, he would be their coach for the day. Steady remembers that some students were injured and asks them if they are okay. Hashimoto raises her hand and says that she was injured, but thanks to Hano's care, she is already healed. After that, the girl points to the side and says that this scoundrel is normal too. She points at Gairashi, who has recovered from the blow and only reacts with a grunt. Steady is delighted to learn that the blessings also included healing. The scientist suggests getting down to business and explains the essentials of today's training. He claims the guys are currently near his research center, where they will fight monsters today. Mito decides to rephrase his statement, claiming that the place is overrun by monsters. Steady smiled and adjusted her glasses. The doors begin to open, and the scientist declares that it will be easier if the children see everything with their own eyes. The building is indeed teeming with monsters of all kinds, but they are all caged, for example, several goblins. In another cage is a lizard, already familiar to the children, which is trying to gnaw through the bars. The further the characters progress, the stronger the monsters become, such as the red ogre. The monster stares angrily at the passing boys, which frightens the girls. The students follow their teachers while looking around them. Leonora and Steady walk ahead, and the scientist explains that this is his collection of monsters intended for his experiments. Leonora explains that the Steady Research Center also serves as a training ground for soldiers. The scientist claims that observing fights is useful to him because that is how he learns the characteristics of each monster. In this play, even Mito, who always seems unperturbed, appears a little frightened. Thus began the combat training of the aspiring heroes, each of them fighting separately against different monsters. However, Shinjo always stayed away from that. He observes his classmates from the sidelines and is surprised by their calmness, but he thinks it is a consequence of the previous day's events. Despite this, Shinjo still perceives fear in their movements. At that moment, Nagase is fighting an orc on the battlefield, but she is unable to stay upright and falls. She gets up, rubbing the bruised areas. The orc is wounded in places by the fire, but retains his fighting spirit. Mito jumps up and tells Steady that the monster is too dangerous. The scientist claims he doesn't think so, because Leonora asked him to be stricter with them. He casts one last look at the battlefield and says that the boys still don't really understand what's going on here. Steady asserts that, firstly, a heroic candidate who has received divine blessing will never lose to such a weak monster. Nagase, for his part, was visibly tired of all these games. She raised her hand and summoned a powerful jet of fire. The girl directed the jet of water towards the orc, who was engulfed in intense flames and burned alive. Steady watches the scene from the stands with a smile and says the guys were capable of doing better from the start, but fear and hesitation held them back. Mito calmed down a little and asked if that was really the only problem. Steady explains that as the level of divine blessing increases, it is even possible to receive another blessing. Their conversation is interrupted by Shinjo, who asks Mito to pay attention to him. The class representative turns to his classmate, surprised, and asks him what happened. Shinjo activates his blessing and declares that he has discovered another blessing on Mito. The ability chart indicates that the first blessing is a sword that protects against evil, and the second a deadly attack against a monster. Surprised, Mito asks Steady to send him onto the battlefield to test this new ability. Sometime later, the old man goes out onto the field and activates his blessing. An orc was chosen as the opponent. Mito activates her first blessing and summons a sword that protects her from evil. The next step is to launch a deadly attack against the monster. After witnessing his abilities, the orc seems very frightened, even before the fight begins. Mito apologizes to him and tells him there will be no mercy. The orc is not trying to attack, but rather is attempting to dodge the blow. He covers his face with his hand and lets out a piercing scream. With a single sword stroke, Mito slices off the monster's arm. The orc stares at the severed limb in horror and screams in pain. The old man decided not to torture him for long and brought his sword down one last time. With a single movement, he decapitates the orc. Mito's classmates cheer and enthusiastically support him from the stands. Observing the village chief, Shinjo realizes that even the armored bear is no match for him and wonders if he himself can receive another blessing. After that, the brunette turns his gaze towards Arashi and tests his abilities, since he too is one of the strongest in the class. Shinjo notices that the boy also possesses several blessings, but decides that it is pointless to tell him. The brunette believes that in this world, traditional methods don't work, so he needs to design a training program tailored to his needs. Outside, the night is deep, but the moon and stars are visible in the sky. We are located next to the house where the students live. Several men led by Arashi gathered in one of the rooms. Narumi looks at her classmate with slight concern and asks him if the guy is serious. Arashi suggests killing Guy, then capturing Leonora and forcing her to reveal how to return to her world. Some of them enthusiastically support his idea and suggest killing Leonora so that she can no longer call them. Arashi notices Narumi's hesitation and asks her to join them, as they have already suffered enough because of Guy and Leonora's actions. Narumi asks what their chances of success are, and Arashi convinces her that with him, their chances will increase. The blonde man doesn't like this idea. He wants to go home, but he's not ready to kill someone for it. However, memories of Hashimoto's injury come back to him. For her sake, he decides to join the team. The following day, the boys continued their training, this time on the field. Mito continued to practice striking using the blessing. Shinjo watched his classmates intently from the side. Observing the village chief, the brunette noticed his zeal. Mito heard it and turned around. The old man said he was still too weak and therefore needed to find a way to become stronger. Shinjo asked if it was true that Mito could defeat half of the knights in this country. The village chief agrees with him, but states that he still cannot defeat the night guy, and that he will only calm down when he can protect all the boys. Shinjo is surprised by his words, then asks what Mito thinks of Leonora. The man replies that they are in reality only pawns for the girl, and that they will therefore not be harmed as long as they obey her orders. Shinjo asks if the village chief will fight the Demon King to the death, as Leonora ordered. Mito replies that that's exactly what he'll do, since everything has already been decided. However, the village chief claims that he will be the only one to fight the Demon King. The guy wants to negotiate a better life for all his classmates with Leonora in exchange for this, but Shinjo doesn't think it will work. Mito claims that he only brandished his sword to obtain her confession. Suddenly, their attention is drawn to Leonora's voice, who congratulates the children on their good work. Leonora appears on the battlefield accompanied by her knight. Steady, who had been watching the boys train, approached them with a smile on his lips. Leonora informs him that, during their absence, the hero candidates will be under his responsibility. Nagase overhears their conversation and asks where Leonora and Guy are going. The blonde woman gave no specific answer, simply stating that they would be absent for a few days, during which time Steady would be their supervisor. After these words, Leonora and the knight turn around and declare that it is time for them to leave. Their silhouettes disappear from the field of view. The further they go, the wider the smile on Steady's face becomes. Training continues and time flies. At that moment, Leonora gets into the carriage driven by Guy, and they set off. On the way, the knight asks the young girl if everything will be all right, but she doesn't understand what he's talking about. Guy asks him to stop pretending because he suspects Arashi of plotting something. The young girl calmly continues to drink her tea, which clearly shows that she already knows. She explains to the knight that, most likely, Arashi wants to rebel against them. Guy asks how Leonora plans to handle the situation. The girl replies that she is curious to see what the boy will propose, and therefore suggests waiting a little while. Guy is not against the idea, but he fears the possibility that the hero candidates might unite. Leonora tries to calm her knight, telling him that they will not defeat her under any circumstances. She says that it won't happen because it's impossible. Guy knows this, but he still doubts it, and the girl then tells him that it could be beneficial for them. Leonora wanted to gradually begin showing children what their place is in this world. The girl's eye color changes and she declares that this is an excellent reason to break the hero's clutches. The girl reverts to her previous appearance and says there is another suspicious person, but she doesn't know if she should leave her alone. Night falls outside and a huge moon illuminates the dark forest. Shinjo went out for his usual nighttime walk to hone his monster hunting techniques. A bull lizard chases the man, but fails to reach the brunette. Shinjo turns around and pulls a dagger from under his cloak. The guy jumps in the air and throws a knife towards the monster. The dagger sank unhindered into the lizard's head, killing it instantly. Landing near the monster, Shinjo is convinced that it is dead. After that, he activates his self-assessment ability, claiming to have killed this monster in 13 seconds. Shinjo assumes he gained a level after killing Delphus, but he doesn't understand how that can translate into practical terms. The man's attention is drawn to a noise behind him, so he turns around. At the last moment, he notices the ogre, who is already raising his hand to strike. The monster crashes to the ground in the exact spot where the brunette was standing a second before. Shinjo managed to go back in time, but he was very surprised by the appearance of this monster. Noticing that the boy had dodged, the ogre rushed towards him with a furious cry. Shinjo did not hesitate and took 3 throwing daggers from his cloak. With a wave of his hand, the boy threw the daggers towards the ogre. However, they did not harm the monster, but simply bounced off it. Shinjo looked at the ogre in horror, noticing its incredible resilience. But the man quickly regained his senses and decided that this was a unique opportunity to conduct experiments. Dodging the monster's rapid attacks, Shinjo activates his power. Instead of the usual sign, the man sees a glow at the level of the ogre's head. Shinjo understands that this highlights the monster's weak point, and he jumps. Finding herself behind the enemy, the brunette pulls out another dagger. The weapon pierces the illuminated area of the body, causing the monster to cry out in pain. Shinjo lands on his side and sees the ogre fall to the ground, motionless. Thanks to this incident, the brunette was able to understand how highlighting weaknesses works. Looking at his hand, Shinjo thinks that it's not a bad power, but that he won't survive long in this world with it. The man is serious, so he clenches his fist. Shinjo had set himself the goal of becoming stronger as quickly as possible. Several goblins emerged from the bushes and rushed at Shinjo. The boy turned towards them and took advantage of their blessing. The weak points on the creatures' bodies instantly began to glow red. Without relaxing for a single moment, Shinjo took out several throwing daggers and threw them at the targets. The knives infallibly sank into the monster's weak points. With one swift blow, the brunette managed to kill all the goblins. The man stood there, his hand outstretched. As he expected, the weak points of these creatures were the brain and the heart, since they were ordinary monsters. Shinjo thought he should find other types of monsters to train against. Suddenly, he heard footsteps, and it seemed that the stranger was approaching the brunette. A figure, a flashlight in hand, appeared among the trees in the heart of the forest. After a few moments, Shinjo managed to make out Kanzaki's silhouette, who did not seem very surprised by this encounter. Shinjo, for his part, did not understand what the young girl was doing in the forest at such an hour, so he asked her directly. Kanzaki stated that she had tried to find the boy in the dormitory, but he wasn't there, so she decided to look in the forest. Shinjo sighed and told him that the forest wasn't safe at this time of year, so he asked him to return to the dormitory. The young girl was outraged by his words, and she declared that these words also applied to him. Shinjo says he's used to fighting monsters in the dark, but that it will be difficult for a girl to handle. Kanzaki asks him to stop making excuses and asks him why he goes out at night. The brunette replies that he is experiencing a new blessing. The young girl doesn't understand what he's talking about. Shinjo reminds him of Steady's words that if you increase the level of a blessing, you have a chance of receiving a new one. The young girl reflected on his words and asked him what new blessing he had received. Shinjo turns away from her and says she doesn't need to know. This makes the girl angry, and she declares that she worried about this boy for nothing and that she came looking for him. The brunette turns around surprised and asks the young girl if she was really worried about him. Kanzaki blushed immediately and said that she didn't mean it that way. Shinjo turns away again and tells the girl to return to the dormitory while he continues his experiments. Kanzaki does not like this idea and declares that she will accompany him. Suddenly, the girl's gaze is drawn to something strange to the side. Kanzaki points to the side of his finger and asks Shinjo if he sees any smoke. In fact, on the side where the dormitory is located, a bright light and smoke can be seen. At that moment, the dormitory where the students were housed was engulfed in flames. Monsters appeared out of nowhere and attacked the hero candidate's residence. Many students were already asleep, so they ran out of the building, still in their pajamas. As they left the house, many different monsters were waiting for them. Hano, accompanied by several girls, ran away from home in her nightgown without knowing where to go. An ogre appeared right in front of her, blocking the girl's path. The young girl possesses a blessing that will not allow her to defeat such an opponent, but suddenly a blue flash appears. Just when the young girl was on the verge of despair, Mito came to her rescue. The village chief neutralized the monster and asked the girl if she was all right. Hono hid behind the man, frightened, and thanked him for his help, saying that she was fine. At that moment, several goblins began to approach them, forcing Mito to protect the girl from their sight. The old man gripped the sword in his hand and declared that there was no end to monsters. Before the monsters could attack Mito and Hano, they were engulfed in flames. Nagas, who was standing behind them, was indignant because she had slept very well, but had been woken up by this noise. The girl asked what was going on, but Arashi interrupted her, saying that it wasn't the time to ask questions. More than half of the building is already engulfed in flames. Shinjo and Kanzaki spotted the smoke and rushed to the dormitory to find out what had happened. They arrived just as the battle against the monsters was in full swing. Narumi met them first and was happy to see that the boys were not injured. Shinjo recounted that they had gone out for a walk and asked what was going on, but Narumi replied that he didn't understand anything himself. Brunette stated that the whole thing looked more like human action, so he assumed there must be a puppeteer somewhere nearby. As soon as he had uttered these words, a familiar voice was heard from the wall, confirming what he had said. Steady, sitting on the roof of the wall, wore a smile and observed the scene. Upon seeing the scientist, Shinjo declared that it was no wonder where this crowd of monsters came from. Steady confirmed his suspicions and stated that he had to drug his subjects in order to carry out his plan. Shinjo asked the scientist what his objectives were and why he wanted to kill the hero candidates. Steady replied that he did not hold it against them, but that he had received orders from his superiors and therefore could not disobey. Kanzaki was surprised by her words and asked if Leonora could have given that order. Steady stood up and declared that Leonora had nothing to do with this matter. The scholar claimed to have received an order from the Demon King, thus revealing himself to the students. The Demon King promised Steady that if he completed this task, he could continue his experiments on monsters. Shinjo stated that the scientist was so absorbed in his research that he was rotten to the core. Steady adjusted his glasses and carefully observed the brunette. After that, the scientist declared that he could not understand the full mysterious essence of monsters as long as he remained human. 2 neighboring buildings were already engulfed in flames. However, the hero candidates did not give up and continued to fight the monsters. Standing on the wall guarded by several orcs, Steady revealed his true nature to the boys. The hero candidates looked at him in disbelief, for it was he who had trained them for a long time. Steady seemed to feel no remorse and ordered the monsters to attack. On his orders, several monsters headed towards Kanzaki, Shinjo, and Narumi. Without hesitating for a second, the brunette devised a plan of action and ordered Kanzaki to act. The young girl held out her hands towards the monsters and ordered them to stop. In the blink of an eye, the creatures froze in place under the influence of the girl's blessing. After that, Kanzaki ordered the monsters to attack Steady. The scientist laughed at their actions and said it was a pathetic attempt. Steady ordered the monsters to wake up, after which the effect of Kanzaki's blessing faded. Having regained control of their bodies, the monsters displayed an evil smile. Kanzaki's powers faded, leaving the girl terrified. Steady reminded the girl that he had been studying monsters for a long time, which explained his ability to quickly subdue them. The scientist gave the order to attack, after which several goblins headed towards Kanzaki. Shinjo appeared right behind the girl and told her to duck. The goblin closest to them was struck by a blade. Shinjo moved quickly from one monster to another. He struck the goblin's weak points and killed them instantly. Steady seemed to have lost his mind and was demanding more of a show from the hero candidates. On his orders, many different monsters attacked Shinjo. However, the man was not afraid and instantly made a decision, jumping to the side. Shinjo eliminated his enemies one by one, starting with the smallest and most agile monsters. With a single blow, he made the monsters fall down, stiff and dead. While he was tending to the small monsters, an orc approached him from behind. Shinjo did not lose his composure and kicked. The monster was already anticipating victory, but did not expect such a devastating blow. The enormous orc fainted, much to the surprise of Shinjo's classmates. The brunette, for his part, had no intention of relaxing, and as soon as he had finished with this wave of monsters, he took a defensive position. The monsters were no longer as determined as they had been a minute before, and no longer dared to approach. Steady began to swear and asked why the monsters were acting this way when Shinjo didn't even possess a useful blessing. Meanwhile, the brunette stood ready for battle and examined the monsters who dared not approach her. Shinjo turned his gaze towards Steady and activated his evaluation ability. After examining the scientist's skills, the brunette realized that Kanzaki had lost control because the monsters had received a higher order. Steady seemed scared because he didn't want to use his secret weapon, but now he had no choice. The scientist put his hand to his face and emitted a strange sound, similar to a hiss. His actions startled Shinjo and distracted him. The brunette asked the scientist what he was doing. However, he did not receive a direct answer. Steady said he had to wait a little while and would then see everything for himself. Shinjo will not wait for the unknown and will kill the scientist first. Just as the man was about to attack Steady, his eyes suddenly widened. The fireball landed very close to Shinjo. The man managed to jump back, thanks to which he remained unharmed. What happened surprised Shinjo, who asked what had happened. When the boy raised his head in the direction from which the fireball had come, he saw a large red dragon. The enormous monster let out a piercing cry, deafening everyone nearby. The shout was followed by loud laughter coming from the direction of Steady. The man held out his hand and declared that this red dragon was his best asset. From its lofty perch, the dragon scanned the battlefield, choosing its victim. His attention was drawn to the three nearest boys, after which the dragon swished its tail. After hitting the chimney of one of the intact houses, the lizard directed the fragments towards the enemy. Seeing the shrapnel flying towards them, the boys were frightened and froze on the spot. Faced with the danger, Kanzaki stated that she could not avoid it. Before the fragments could reach her, Shinjo covered the girl with his body, pushing her aside. The dragon gazed impassively at its victims. Once the danger had passed, Shinjo moved away from the girl and asked her if she was all right. The brunette looked at Narumi, the survivor, and declared that another attack was imminent. She therefore ordered the boy and girl to leave. Immediately after these words, the red dragon beat its wings, ready to strike again. Narumi grabbed Kensaki in her arms and rushed to the side, while Shinjo drew the dragon's attention to him. The lizard raised its head with a furious growl, but a blue glow appeared just below its head, at neck level. Only Shinjo could see this light thanks to his gift, because this place was the dragon's weak point. Having noticed it, the brunette jumped up and slid the knife along the lizard's scales. But not only did his dagger fail to injure the creature, it broke during the process. The dragon descended and stood on the ground, looking at Shinjo. The brunette landed a little further away from the creature and turned around to look at it. The boy looked at the broken dagger and realized that with his current abilities, he would not be able to pierce the dragon's defense. While Shinjo was trying to devise a plan for the next steps, the dragon was preparing for a new attack. Suddenly, Arashi's voice rang out from the roof of the house, saying that such an imposing monster suited him well. The boy rushed at the dragon, activating its explosive power. The dragon felt the pain of his blow and retreated. Thanks to this, Arashi was able to jump to the ground without any unnecessary obstacles. Observing the dragon from below, the man smiled and asked how the monster could withstand such a blow. But as soon as he turned his eyes towards the dragon, fear appeared in his eyes. His actions did not cause much harm to the dragon, but only made it angry. The monster attacked Arashi with a volley of flames, hitting its target every time. The man fell to the ground, covered his face with his palms, and began to roll on the ground, trying to escape the flames. When he had managed to extinguish the flames, Shinjo told him that he shouldn't have let his guard down. Seeing Arashi rub his shoulder, the brunette thought that his strength should be sufficient to carry out his plan. Shinjo approached the brown-haired man and told him to listen carefully to the plan of action. They looked at the dragon, which had become angry during the battle. The man was convinced that together they would be able to defeat this enemy. Shinjo's words angered Arashi, and he asked him what the brunette could possibly be used for. The man replies that he knows the enemy's weak points, but that he does not have the strength to reach them. Arashi laughed at his words and replied that he had no intention of allying himself with a weak person. While the brown-haired man was distracted, Shinjo kept an eye on the enemy and warned him of his return. The dragon, meanwhile, performs a 360-degree rotation in order to knock men down with its tail. Arashi was indignant just a minute ago, but upon hearing Shinjo's warning, he jumped up and dodged the blow. Taking advantage of the boy's distraction, the dragon filled its mouth with flames. Arashi had just landed and immediately perceived the threat. However, he doesn't have enough time to dodge. The dragon directs its flames towards the man crouching in place. Screaming in pain, Arashi tries to extinguish the fire. The dragon reached its target and is now happy. Shatten managed to extinguish the fire, but it suffered serious damage. Shinjo manages to dodge the attack and tells Arashi that if he thinks he can defeat the dragon alone, then he can continue. The brown-haired man realizes he can't manage on his own and asks the brunette exactly where he should knock. Shinjo tells Arashi that there is only one inverted scale on the dragon's throat. At these words, the brown-haired man began to search for this place, and having found it, he asked if this was indeed the one. Shinjo says he will distract the dragon while Arashi has to strike that scale with his power. The brunette asks the boy if he can handle the situation, and he replies in the affirmative. Steady's impatient cry comes from the wall. The scientist asks why the dragon is hesitating and hasn't killed the boys yet. Steady reaches out and uses her power to order the dragon to attack. The red dragon, mad with rage, throws its head back and lets out a menacing roar. The lizard began to beat its wings forcefully, sending jets of air toward the boys. Arashi and Shinjo ducked down, trying to withstand the gusts of wind. Shaitan was about to put his plan into action, but the dragon's actions prevented him from carrying it out. After a few moments, the dragon roared in a menacing voice. For a brief moment, it stopped flapping its wings. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Shinjo puts his plan into action. He strikes the dragon several times in the face. Shinjo does not cause any damage to the monster, but manages to draw its attention to him. When the dragon is distracted from Arashi, the brunette runs away. As planned, the monster sets off in pursuit of Shinjo. The dragon opens its mouth wide, ready to grab the man running in front of it. But when he approaches, the brunette manages to move to the side. Shinjo steps back slightly to observe the location of the dragon and Arashi. After making sure that the weak point was open and accessible to attack, the brunette ordered Arashi to attack. The brown-haired man runs towards them and slips under the dragon's neck, which has lowered its head to try and grab Shinjo. A few seconds later, he finds himself directly under the weak point. Without hesitation, Arashi activates his blessing and sends a shock wave towards the inverted scale. The dragon raises its head, roaring in pain. With a final howl, the lizard collapses to the ground. Steady, standing on the wall, cannot believe what has happened. Arashi approaches the head of the defeated monster and rejoices in his new victory. Shinjo reminds him that this guy has trouble standing up, but continues to boast. Meanwhile, the brunette turns to Steady and asks him what he will do without his trump card. The scientist began looking around him in panic, saying that he still had many monsters. However, as soon as he understood the situation as a whole, he froze on the spot. While Arashi and Shinjo fought the dragon, the other boys fought relentlessly against other monsters. Steady was distracted and didn't notice that all of his monsters had been killed by other students. Wiping the blood from his sword, Mito announces that they have already eliminated the rest of the enemies. All the hero candidates are ready to get rid of Steady. The scientist realizes he is at a disadvantage and decides to flee. However, Narumi was already waiting for him behind him. Having used his blessing and flown towards the wall in a few moments, Steady did not expect to see an enemy behind him, which caused him to stumble. He doesn't have time to understand what happened, but he's already hurtling down the high wall. Steady was already preparing for a fatal fall, but he landed in a bubble of water. He didn't expect to find himself in the water, so he started coughing as soon as he surfaced. But his troubles don't end there. As soon as he opens his eyes, he sees a blade in front of him. Shinjo stands in front of him and declares that Steady attacked them in the middle of the night, and that he therefore has many questions to ask him. The scientist tried to escape from the water bubble, declaring that he would tell them everything if they spared him. Before he could say another word, a sharp pain pierced him. The hero candidates look in fear at the man who is groaning in pain. They don't have time to understand what happened, but Steady is already dead. Mito asked what had happened, and Shinjo suggested it might be some kind of curse technique. The elder suggested that the curse was activated at the moment Steady wanted to reveal everything to them. In response to this, Shinjo stated that the threat posed by the Demon King's army to the hero candidates will only increase. The night ended at that moment. The day after the Steady incident, a brigade of firefighters was dispatched to the scene to manage the aftermath of the fire. At that moment, the hero candidates gathered at the castle to speak with Leonora, who had arrived. The young girl couldn't believe that such a thing could happen in their absence. Narumi asked if the girl really hadn't realized it when she entrusted them to Steady. The young girl removed her hand from her face and everyone could see the smile that was forming on her lips. Leonora apologized for any misunderstanding that may have arisen between them. She meant that she did not expect such extensive damage from a monstrous lord of Steady's level. His words left the boys frozen in astonishment. Nagisa asked Leonora why, knowing who Steady was, she had done nothing. The girl replied that she had already mentioned earlier that their training would become more rigorous, so this was just the beginning. One of the students exclaimed that some of them could have died because they were asleep in their rooms at the time of the arson. The night guide told him not to complain because they must not lower their guard even at night, otherwise they would die instantly. His words further outraged the boys who survived the brutal attack. Shinjo thought that even as a killer, he wouldn't immediately notice the horde of monsters, much less that one could expect that from ordinary school children. Leonora decided to change the subject of conversation. The young girl informed the hero candidates that they would soon be heading towards the capital. Mito, as class representative, asked why they had to leave. Leonora claims that the hero candidates are the hottest topic in the kingdom right now. It was decided to organize a parade to mark their arrival. In this regard, the locals will be happy to see the heroes of the event. The detachment accompanying the hero candidates sets off. As night fell, the night guy gave the order to set up camp, specifying that they would leave at dawn. Once the tents were set up and the fires lit, the students gathered in small groups and rested around their fires. A group of Arasi people settled near one of these fires, and they said there were about 30 people in the camp. The boy was warming himself by the fire, chewing a piece of dried meat. His friends didn't understand what he was talking about, so Aris explained that he was talking about the guards who had been assigned to them. Observing the knights, the brown-haired man declared that he saw no one serious among them. One of them said that Arashi could defeat them all in one fell swoop, but he doesn't understand why they need this information. The brown-haired man told him to turn around, because this was an excellent opportunity to put their plan into action. Only after that did the guys begin to understand that they were actually in a favorable position. Usually they are surrounded by many more soldiers, but this time there are only 30 of them, and all are weaker than any student. Arashi takes another bite of meat and is indignant that they are not treated as beings worthy of respect. By observing the soldiers' behavior, Arashi concludes that they are not even considering the possibility of mutiny. Shuten declares that they will escape today and demands that Narumi and the others be summoned immediately. Shinjo watched their conversation from the shadow of the tent. He also noticed that the security around them was not as significant as usual. However, the reason is not that they are disrespected, but that Night Guy and Leonora have confidence in their own abilities. Shinjo needs more time to understand their intentions, so he decides to turn to Mito. The brunette asks the village chief to step aside for a moment to speak. Some time passes and the camp seems deserted. Only the guards remain in the street, but even under the tents, no candidate for the title of hero can be seen. Some guys were hiding in the bushes, away from the camp. Arashi has gathered his entire team and is preparing to put his plan into action. Shaitan asked if everyone, except the guards, had fallen asleep. Narumi states that this is most likely the case, and this sounds like a call to action for Arashi. But before they could even take a single step, Mito yelled at them, ordering them to stop. Arashi and his team of 6 jumped in surprise and looked at the uninvited guests. Several of Mito's classmates accompanied him, including Nagase and Hono. The elder approached Arashi and asked him if he really wanted to kill Leonora and all the soldiers. The brown-haired man tries to find out who has become a spy and has reported everything to the village chief. Mito did not denounce anyone, claiming that he himself heard about the situation while passing by Arashi's tent. Nagase asks if the guys are really going to do that, because it seems more like madness. Arashi claims that they are the crazy ones because they continue to play according to this woman's rules. Mito says he understands their feelings, but killing is not the solution. There must be another way. Arashi says they are all good at talking, but does anyone have a real plan? Mito replies that his plan is to become Leonora's pawn and defeat the Demon King in exchange for the safety of the other students. Arashi does not appreciate his plan and asks if the leader is really naive enough to believe that Leonora will accept. Mito is convinced that if he becomes stronger, Leonora will be forced to listen to him. Arashi spits and declares that he does not need protection, that he can return alone to his world. The principal expected this outcome, so he assembled students capable of stopping Arashi. The team with brown hair is also determined. Arashi lunges at Mito, telling him not to regret his words later. The village chief manages to block the blow from the brown-haired man. However, the force of the blow is sufficient to repel Mito. The old man did not expect such speed and force, and now looks in surprise at his trembling hands. Arashi also looks at Mito in surprise, not understanding how he was able to block his attack. The boys froze when they heard the guard ask them what they were doing. Arashi hears approaching footsteps and doesn't know what to do. Mito takes charge of the matter and, turning to the soldiers, tells them that there has been a small quarrel between them. After these words, the guards prepared to leave, telling the boys that it was too early to get up and that they should therefore return to their tents and go to bed. As the soldiers disappear from his sight, Mito hears angry shouts coming from Arashi. The brown-haired man turned away from the chief and was preparing to leave. Mito watches him leave, hoping that the boy will give up his attempts at rebellion. Arashi says that their leader's gentleness is starting to irritate him. Despite his indignation, Arashi did not attempt to sow chaos for the remainder of the journey. The long journey to the capital of the sacred kingdom of Digrist is coming to an end. The street was crowded with people and merchants were everywhere, welcoming new customers. Narumi looked around with interest and declared that the capital was truly magnificent. Hashimoto does not share her enthusiasm. The young girl does not like crowds. Nagase had pointed out that it wasn't as bad here as in Tokyo, and her friend agreed. A crowd had lined up to let the hero candidates pass. At the head of the procession was a carriage with Leonora, driven by the night guy. Passers-by, who have not yet noticed the procession, watched the scene in surprise. While driving the carriage, Guy ordered them to make way for Saint Leonora and the heroes. After his words, the crowd grew even larger, for everyone wanted to see with their own eyes the hero candidates chosen by God himself. The boys followed the carriage, looking around them. Some smiled kindly, while others paid no attention to what was happening around them. The inhabitants of the capital, Digrest, joyfully welcomed the heroes. Mito walked in front of all the students and greeted people with a friendly gesture. At the end of the procession, Arasi walked with his friends and looked at the inhabitants with displeasure. Shinjo, for his part, stated that Leonora had not lied about the residents who were hoping for their arrival, but this only increased Kenzaki's mistrust. The brunette looked around him, but people didn't interest him. He remembered everything around him. What interested Shinjo most was the white castle with blue roofs, which stood on a hill. Upon their arrival at the palace, the boys were greeted by the holy knight Rains, who invited the heroes to rest after their long journey. The boys jumped happily onto the bed, as they were very tired after spending so many days sleeping on the floor. The girls immediately headed to the baths to wash off the signs of fatigue. Most of Arashi's team members went to the cafeteria to get something to eat. For his part, Mito wasted no time and decided to head to the training room. Shinjo found an ideal location with a view of the castle and its surroundings. As before, Shinjo's most important task was to gather information about his whereabouts. The man was trying to move around the castle as discreetly as possible. He observed the security system and studied its capabilities. However, his observations did not last long, as there were too many guards in the castle. While walking down one of the corridors, the man spotted a familiar person at the window. Next to the guards stood the Knight Rains, who welcomed them and escorted them to the castle. Shinjo jumped out of the window unnoticed and took a seat under a tree, observing what was happening. The guard questioned the knight about the hero candidates, and the man replied that they were resting in the guest rooms. He is asked if God really chose these children, and Rains replies that these children possess powers that few people can possess. The guards fear that inviting hero candidates to the capital will provoke the followers of the Demon King. Another guard confirms his statements, reporting suspicious actions on the part of the enemy. Observing their conversation, Shinjo wondered who the Demon King's followers were. Knight Rains reassures them, telling them they have nothing to fear as long as they have the hero candidates on their side. The man decides to end the conversation and says they have to leave because training is about to begin. Shinjo remains in the shade of a tree and wonders if he should go into town to get more information. He decides to do exactly that, and so waits until nightfall. Most of the rumors are circulating at this time of day in the tavern, so they become Shinjo's target. A man enters one of these establishments and discovers a rather lively crowd. Shinjo approaches the main counter and, holding out a coin, asks for a glass of beer. The owner asks him to wait a minute and leaves. Shinjo overhears a conversation between some villagers who are mocking the hero candidates, saying they are too young and too weak. But the controversy subsides when we address the fact that the heroes are chosen by a saint, which indicates that the church exerts a great influence. A minute later, the tavern keeper placed his beer mug in front of Shinjo. The brunette explains that he is a traveler passing through and knows nothing about local traditions, so he asks permission to ask a few questions. Shinjo decides to begin by inquiring about the identity of the Demon King's followers, citing conversations among those around him. The old man immediately understands what the other is talking about and asks him if he knows that they are at war with the Demon King. The Demon King controls a huge army, which gives him an appearance of omnipotence in the eyes of many. That is why some among the people admired and revered his power. The owner told us that recently, cultists had been spreading terror throughout the country and had blown up several aristocratic houses. Shinjo compares them to terrorists and states that this looks like a serious problem. The brunette found everything he needed, and after sitting for a moment out of concern for appearances, she moved on. In this city, everyone believes that only heroic candidates are capable of defeating the Demon King, and the believers may soon take action. As Shinjo wanders down the street lost in thought, he is drawn to Kanzaki, who is walking towards him. The girl said she had been looking for this boy for a long time, and asked him where he had been all this time. Shinjo explains that they know nothing about the capital, so he needs time to gather information. Kanzaki understands him, but she thinks the boy is acting too recklessly by going out alone at night. The girl states that she is ready to help at any time if Shinjo asks her to. The boy doesn't listen to her and says he can handle the situation himself and that the girl shouldn't leave the class. Kanzaki insists that she can be useful, and Shinjo eventually gives in. The brunette advises the young girl to gather information by questioning the residents of the neighborhood. Satisfied with his words, Kanzaki, humming a song, left to accomplish the task that had been entrusted to her. While they are talking, the boys do not notice a dark figure in the crowd that has been watching them for a long time. The stranger smiles and continues to observe the hero candidates. After strolling around the city for a little longer, Shinjo decides to return to the castle. In the middle of the night, he climbs through an open window. As he took off his cloak, the man thought that he had learned nothing useful, but that what he had learned would be more than enough. While Shinjo was lost in thought, he heard voices. The boy put his coat back on and headed towards the door, listening. Shinjo decides to leave the room and see for himself. In one of the large rooms, his classmates gathered and discussed something. Shinjo approached and asked what had happened, and one of his classmates replied that they couldn't find Kenzaki anywhere. Matano, who shared the same room as her, noticed her absence, and the boys began to look for her. Shinjo thought that he too had been gone for a long time, but perhaps they hadn't looked for him because he lived alone. Mito approached Shinjo and asked him if he knew anything about Kanzaki's whereabouts. The brunette replied that he knew nothing because he had been in his room the whole time. The village chief sighed sadly. Mito asserts that the girl is definitely not in the castle, so they must split up and find her before nightfall. Nagase states that Kanzaki knows how to defend herself, but she does not oppose the class representative's proposal. Shinjo thinks that in reality it is already pitch black outside, and that all the inhabitants of the city are already asleep. The man feels partly responsible for the girl's disappearance, and therefore decides to participate in the search. He ventured alone into the city streets. He quickly managed to find the place where he and Kanzaki had parted ways. His gaze fell upon a piece of paper lying in the middle of a deserted street. As he approached, the boy saw that it was Kanzaki's student ID card. While he was consulting the map, a stranger began to approach him from behind. When the attackers felt that Shinjo was distracted, they emerged from their hiding places with the intention of killing him. The first individual who approached the brunette missed his target, as Shinjo parried his blow with his dagger. The brunette turns around and sees another person. Before he could be touched, Shinjo grabbed his attacker's arm. The brunette guides her opponent's hand in the other direction. His actions prompted one man to rob another at gunpoint. When the stranger finally managed to free his wrist, it was too late, which made him swear. Shinjo doesn't let go of the man and kicks him in the face. The stranger in the coat collapses to the ground, stunned by the blow. An intense pain pierced him, preventing him from getting up. The other strangers stayed away, trembling with fear, not daring to approach the man who had taken care of their acquaintances. Shinjo stated that they were all beginners in both swordsmanship and concealment. After using her blessing, the brunette learns that her attackers are ordinary people and asks them what they are trying to accomplish. The stranger is so afraid of Shinjo that he is unable to respond. The brunette wasn't about to let him get away with it and started to approach the guy. Furthermore, in one of the stone buildings, there is a meeting place for sectarians. Kanzaki was captured, beaten, and chained, leaving the girl looking both angry and frightened. She looks angrily at her captors. Two men, one of whom is holding a whip, laugh at the young girl, saying they are very frightened by her gaze. Kanzaki says they can torture her as much as they want, but she won't tell them anything. The kidnappers claim they want to know more about the hero candidates and nothing more. One of the men reaches out to the defenseless girl. He grabbed her by the collar of her shirt and pulled violently, tearing the fabric on her chest. The kidnappers laugh at the embarrassed girl and ask her how long she can put up with this. While the boys laugh and make fun of the girl, they let their guard down and don't notice Shinjo lurking around the corner. After using the blessing spell, the brunette learns that the kidnappers are mere amateurs, and therefore could not have kidnapped Kanzaki themselves. Unwilling to wait any longer, Shinjo throws throwing knives in their direction. Each knife hits its target and kills strangers. Kanzaki doesn't have time to understand what happened. The bodies of her executioners collapsed motionless at her feet in an instant. She looked down at them, trying to understand what had happened. His attention was drawn to Shinjo's voice, asking if the girl was all right. Kanzaki looked at his savior in surprise. While the man was freeing her from her chains, the girl wanted to tell everything. But Shinjo interrupted her, saying it wasn't the right time and they had to leave quickly. Once freed, Kanzaki thanks the brunette for her help. As Shinjo observed the surroundings, something caught his attention. He stood up abruptly and approached Kanzaki. A glimmer of light was rapidly approaching them, emerging from the darkness. A stranger dressed in a blue robe runs towards them and prepares to strike. However, the shot landed on empty ground without hitting the girl and the boy. Shinjo reacts in time and, taking the girl in his arms, jumps to the side. The man is surprised that the boys managed to dodge his sword. When the dust settles, we see Night Reigns, who declares that they cannot be left alive. Shinjo undoubtedly recognizes the man who met them as the Knight. Reigns corrects him by introducing himself as the head of the Demon King's church. Shinjo prepares for the attack and declares that the country doesn't have much time left if the enemy has come so close to the pinnacle of power. Reigns also adopts a combative stance, stating that once he has killed all the hero candidates, they can hasten the day of destruction. Shinjo let go of Kanzaki so that she wouldn't get caught up in the fight. Reigns decided there was no time to lose. Otherwise, the other hero candidates might unmask him. Shinjo uses his blessing on the knight to learn more about his abilities. Thanks to this, the brunette learns that Reigns possesses skills in swordsmanship and fire techniques. All of the knight's indicators are at level B, making him versatile. At one point, Reigns felt that Shinjo had allowed himself to be distracted. It was at this precise moment that the knight launched his attack. Approaching Shinjo quickly, Reigns raises his sword above him. However, he falls back to the ground because the brunette manages to jump to the side in time. The man is beginning to get irritated by his opponent's agility. He holds out his hand and a pentagram appears on his palm. Reigns uses his blessing and commands the fire to burn his enemies. Fireballs emerge from the expanding pentagram and head towards Shinjo. The brunette jumps, dodging the attack, and realizes that this is what the fire technique looks like. Fireballs fly under Shinjo's feet without harming him. But things aren't as simple as this guy might think. Reigns appears next to Shinjo and brandishes his sword, declaring that he will not be able to dodge it in midair. The brunette tries to retaliate and throws one of the daggers at the knight. Reigns easily dodges the weapon and declares that all of Shinjo's attempts are useless. On the knight's orders, his sword bursts into flames. Reigns raises his flaming sword and declares that this is the end of Shinjo. But before the attack could reach the hero candidate, a gunshot rang out. Sensing that the situation had taken an unfavorable turn, Shinjo took out his pistol and fired. The field struck the surprised knight squarely on the head. Shinjo landed on the ground, still holding the gun in his hand. At that moment, Reigns collapses dead. Shinjo looks sadly at the gun he's holding in his hand. As he tucked it away in his cloak, the man told himself that he hadn't wanted to use it because ammunition was limited. Shinjo shares Reigns' opinion that the jump was a mistake and decides that he needs to train in close combat. Surprised, Kanzaki glances over his shoulder and asks if Shinjo really has a weapon on him. The brunette claims that this will happen naturally since he is a hitman, to which the young girl expresses her displeasure. But despite her words, the young girl once again thanks Shinjo for coming to save her. The man claims it was a mere coincidence and asks why Kanzaki didn't use his control power. The young girl explains that the handcuffs that held her blocked the power of the blessing. The man thought about his words and picked up the young girl's cloak, which was lying on the ground. After covering the girl, Shinjo turns towards the exit and declares that it is time for them to leave. Kanzaki informs the boy that these people are going to attack their classmates. Shinjo replies that he already knows everything because it was the man who assaulted him in the street who told him. The brunette remembers the man who had begged her to leave him alone. Caressing the dagger, Shinjo replied that everything depended on the boy's behavior. The man stated that he had been ordered to do this because the very existence of hero candidates is an insult to the Demon King. Shinjo, with a knife to the sect member's throat, asked him what they had done to Kanzaki. The man replied that the girl was still alive because they planned to use her in the attack against the other heroes. At that moment, the interrogation of the sectarian ended and daylight began to break through outside. Kanzaki and Shinjo headed towards the castle, and the boy said that, unlike Steady, the curse had not silenced the members of the cult. This indicates that they are not cooperating with demons. Kanzaki thought that the inhabitants of this world were their allies, but things turned out to be more complicated than they first appeared. Shinjo told the girl not to relax, because that was precisely why those sextants had managed to handcuff her. Kanzaki replied that they had been polite at first, but Shinjo reminded him that the enemies could be not only demons, but also humans. The young girl turned away, saying that she would not be so naive anymore. During their conversation, Mito's voice could be heard. Turning around, the young girl saw the village chief wave his hand and point in their direction. The man was very happy that they had managed to find Kanzaki. Mito is relieved that the boys are safe and sound, and the girl apologizes for worrying them. The village chief says that the main thing is that the boys were not hurt and asks if Shinjo found the girl. The brunette replies that it's true and asks Mito to step aside to talk. According to him, the village chief understands that something has happened. While the villagers were still asleep, Shinjo told Mito what he had learned about the Demon King Church. This story tells the tale of a group of fanatics who believe in the omnipotence of the Demon King and want to kill the hero candidates. Mito believes that, unlike monsters, humans will be much harder to identify. Shinjo agrees with him and says that the rest of his classmates should be warned of the danger. The village chief thinks they should inform Leonora so that they can be assigned increased security. Kanzaki replies that even if they confess everything to Leonora, she will tell them that they must defend themselves. Mito explains that they still need to tell the guys everything and decide what to do next. Their conversation is interrupted by a thunderous explosion. A cloud of smoke appeared coming from one of the houses. The next moment, footsteps were heard. The sect members surrounded Kanzaki, Shinjo, and Mito. Many armed people gathered around them. Their appearance was no different from that of the other disciples of the Demon King. Mito suggested that the cult members were attacking locations where the Kanzaki research teams were situated. Shinjo warns that members of the sect are approaching. The hero candidates prepare for combat and take a defensive position, back to back. Smoke from the explosions began to fill the street. A small squad of potential heroes was preparing for battle. Not only were they trapped, but other guys were also surrounded, and in one of those teams were Narumi and Hashimoto. On the other team, we find Nagase and her friends. Arasi and his friends found themselves in the last one. An analysis of the adversaries revealed that not all of the sectarians possessed any particular skills. Based on their skills, Shinjo observes that the 6 members of the sect are less competent than Reigns. With a war cry, the cult combat squad launched its attack. The heroic candidates remained calm and ready to defend themselves. Shinjo assessed the situation and told Kanzaki to use his control power. Obeying his instructions, the young girl raised her hand and ordered everyone to stop. In the blink of an eye, the attackers froze on the spot, unable to move. Shinjo immediately took out his throwing knives and threw them towards the attackers. Each of the daggers reached its target without difficulty. Mito turned to his classmates and cried out indignantly. The village chief reminded Shinjo that they were fighting human beings, not monsters. The brunette, furious at his words, declared that it didn't matter because they were their enemies. Mito was about to protest, but Shinjo informed him that another man had surprised them. It was only after uttering these words that the old man felt that a sectarian had surprised him from behind. Mito manages to turn around and summon his sword just as the enemy strikes. The village chief asks the aggressor why they are behaving this way, since they are all human beings. Without concealing his sarcasm, the sectarian asserts that they will do anything for their master. Kanzaki reaches out and prepares to help Mito. However, Shinjo interrupts him, blocking his view. The guy told him not to get involved because it's time Mito stopped being so weak. The old man's sword momentarily blinds the cult member. When he regains his senses, he finds that his sword has shattered under Mito's power. The man stares at the broken weapon in fear. Mito claims that if the man surrenders now, he will spare him. The sectarian becomes angry at his words and starts shouting at the man. Without losing his zeal, the man raises the now broken weapon above Mito. The village chief did not expect such a reaction from a man who was in a desperate situation. Therefore, Mito does not have time to dodge, and the sword wounds his hand. Realizing that he had managed to injure the hero candidate himself, the man burst into malicious laughter. Mito looked at him in astonishment and didn't understand why everything was happening this way. Realizing that no amount of persuasion would work, the old man raised his sword and struck the sectarian. The man is seriously injured and collapses to the ground. Mito looks at him in surprise. The half-dead fanatic, laughing with rage, crawls towards the man, determined not to give up until the very end. Shinjo approaches Mito and orders him to finish off the man. The village chief says that nothing can help him anyway. Shinjo replies that they cannot be 100% sure, and therefore they must eliminate the threat. Mito asks why the brunette is so calm, and the latter replies that the class representative must choose between killing the man now or waiting for him to attack one of their classmates. Shinjo criticizes the class representative for being the strongest in the class, but incapable of making a decision. Seeing the doubt in Mito's eyes, the boy asks him what is more important to him, the life of a stranger or that of his classmates. The chief remained silent for a few seconds, after which he declared that he understood everything. Mito approaches the man and delivers the final blow. Once his work was finished, the village chief turned to the boys and told them to help others. Meanwhile, we are transported to a street in the city. This group of fanatics had the misfortune of crossing paths with Arasi's team. The man already has the last survivor by the neck. He can't say anything to the hero candidate because he's suffocating. Arashi looks at the suffering man with an evil smile. The man clenches his fist and gathers the force of the explosion. The next moment, he points his fist at the sect member. Arashi seems delighted to have the opportunity to fight someone. At that moment, the man, burned by the explosion, collapsed to the ground. His classmates turn around and smile, saying that the guy is ruthless. The other team is also doing very well in attack. Nagase uses his firepower to help others. A single blow from his hand was enough to reduce several opponents to ashes. However, cult members continue to arrive regularly. Nagase turns to her friends and asks them why they aren't fighting. The girls reply that they were taught to fight monsters, but that in front of them are human beings. Nagase brings them back to their senses by telling them that if they do not kill them, they will die by their own hand. At that moment, an opponent approached one of the girls and kicked her. Taking advantage of the opportunity, another sectarian attacked the second girl. Nagus watched what was happening, in shock, and didn't know how she could get out of this on her own. Leonora, for her part, asked how she should assess the children's abilities. At a certain point, because some girls refuse to fight, they find themselves trapped. That's when Leonora appears on the battlefield. The sectarians turn around and look at the saint in horror. Some of the Demon King's followers are starting to get angry. With a smile on her face, Leonora explains that the hero candidates are under her command, so it is not surprising that she helps them in case of danger. The sectarians began to surround the young girl, claiming that she could do nothing without the knights. The young girl replies with a smile that they are just a group of amateurs and therefore not her opponents. A man, unable to contain himself any longer, attacks Leonora and orders her to be quiet. Several sectarians rush from all sides towards the motionless young girl. However, Leonora does not appear to have any intention of defending herself. Her smile never leaves her for a second. At the very last moment, the young girl utters only one sentence, falls on her face. Divine power brings all adversaries to their knees in the blink of an eye. The entire region is bathed in sunshine. Enveloped in divine power, the sectarians are unable to move. It was as if they were pinned to the ground by heavy stones, immobilizing them. Nagas observed the scene from the side and realized that Leonora's divine blessing was very similar to Kanzaki's power. As Leonora approached the hero candidates, she asked them not to compare her strength to anything of that nature. The girl stated that her strength, range, and enslavement techniques surpassed Kanzaki's in every respect. Nagase asked Leonora why she decided to help them. The young girl replied that she was assessing their abilities, but that, if possible, she did not wish to intervene in this fight. Nagas states that, in this case, they should thank her for her help. The saint asks that no thanks be given, as directing subordinates is part of her job. The girl's attention is drawn to the voice of one of the sectarians. Lying on the ground, the man speaks to Leonora. He demands that the saint not ignore them and reveal to them what will happen to them. The girl looked at him, smiling, and apologized, saying she had forgotten they were still alive. Leonora uses her power and orders the hero candidates to kill all members of the cult. The sun's rays envelop the girls' bodies and subdue them. The girls, trembling with fear, are holding weapons in their hands and look terrified. One of the girls, raising her sword above the sect member, demands that Leonora stop. The man over whom she raised her sword begged for her mercy. Tears welled up in the schoolgirl's eyes. She struck, letting out a shrill cry, trembling with fear. Their bodies are unable to resist Leonora's control. Shinjo and Kanzaki observe the entire scene from the roof of a neighboring building. They see Leonora motionless, observing the hero candidates under her control, killing the cult members who do not resist. Shinjo realizes that this is exactly what his third-level enslavement technique looks like. Kanzaki claims that Leonora's power far surpasses his own, since she was able to control a very large number of people. While observing everything that was happening in the square, something was bothering Shinjo. He thought they absolutely had to find a way to resist Leonora. All the teams were able to cope with the attack. After that, it was decided to return to the castle. Half a day has passed since the attack by the Demon King's followers. All the guys were gathered in the main hall to discuss what had happened when Nagas entered. Hashimoto approached the girl and asked her how the others were feeling. Nagase shook his head and said that the boys were not feeling well, as this situation was a shock to each of them. Hashimoto sighed sadly. She was genuinely worried about her classmates. Narumi stated that he could not forgive Leonora for manipulating them like puppets, for killing people. The man asked Nagase how she was feeling, since her body was also being controlled. The girl replies that she doesn't care, but she is irritated by the situation. Mito clenches his fists and says it's entirely his fault because he failed to come to the rescue. The classmates are starting to calm the class representative because he has managed to help many people. Kanzaki stated that everything could have been different if they had arrived on time. However, she is interrupted by Shinjo, who declares that their arrival would not have changed anything. After defeating the believers, Shinjo and Mito separated to help more people. They managed to protect several groups, but none succeeded in reaching Nagase's group. Shinjo thought that the Demon King cult would remain silent for a while, since he had killed their leader, Reigns. Shinjo is now preoccupied with something else, so he calls Kanzaki. The man is about to leave the room and asks the woman to step aside so they can talk. Kanzaki agrees and leaves after Shinjo. The boy and girl enter Shinjo's room and close the door behind them. Kanzaki immediately asks the man what he is up to. The brunette claims to have a plan to counter Leonora's enslavement technology. However, to do this, he will need the help of someone with a similar power, namely Kanzaki's help. The young girl is embarrassed, but she replies that she sees no problem with his proposal. Kanzaki asks her what she should do. Shinjo turns to the girl and orders her to use the control technique on him. The girl looks at the boy in horror, not understanding how this can help. The day after the victory over the Demon King sect, a grand parade was organized to celebrate the arrival of the hero candidates. The procession passed through all the main streets of the capital. People watched the hero candidates with smiles on their faces. The battle against the sect showed the townspeople just how strong the candidates were. Thanks to their victory, these boys have won the hearts of the public. The candidates arrived on horseback and greeted the townspeople. Some were worried because they had never ridden a horse before, while others were relaxed. Kanzaki and Shinjo walked side by side, and the girl seemed worried. At that precise moment, Shinjo could only think of one thing. Could Leonora have planned everything from the beginning? If this proves true, the young girl will become an extremely dangerous adversary. The parade ends near the main gate leading to the castle. All the boys gather in front of Leonora and the night guy. The saint declares that their work is now finished and that they can return to the temple city of Alpha. Kanzaki doesn't understand what this place is, and Shinjo then assumes that it is the city where they were summoned. Mito asks Leonora in surprise if she will come back with them. The girl explained that she still had to deal with the aftermath of the incident, so Guy would accompany the boys. Nagase jokes that their dormitory also burned down at one point, proving that this is a favorite tactic of demons. However, few people laugh at the joke, which causes the girl to shift her attention to something else. Her friends have not yet recovered from the incident in which Leonora participated. They therefore look tired and depressed. Nagase approaches a young girl named Naomi and asks her if she is all right. With tears in her eyes, the young girl replied that she was fine and asked that no attention be paid to her. Suddenly, Leonora, smiling, appears next to Naomi and asks her if the girls are all right. The blonde woman is so frightened by the appearance of the saint that she screams. She steps back but stumbles over her own feet. Nagase manages to run up to the girl and support her, preventing her from falling to the ground. Naomi hesitantly states that she is fine. Leonora says that, since nothing terrible has happened, she is going to leave them. Nagase shouts angrily at Leonora, who pretends not to understand. The saint was already leaving at that moment, but after the girl's words, she stopped. Naomi felt unwell and lay down across Nagase's lap, asking the girl to stop. A smile lit up Leonora's face once again. After that, she continued on her way, saying that they would meet again. All the students greeted the saint with angry expressions on their faces. Even Mito was no exception. Shinjo watched silently from the sidelines. Arasi, in turn, smiled, as if to say that he had been right about Leonora. When the saint disappeared behind the door, the night guy gave the order to advance. The boys spent the whole day on the road, and at nightfall they set up camp. This time, there was no trace left of the pleasant moments that had passed. After waiting until nightfall, Arasi got up and headed toward the forest. His team followed him. This time, Shinjo did not react in any way to their actions. However, from their behavior, the brunette understood that they were prepared. Kanzaki sat down next to Shinjo and asked them if they had really decided to put their plan into action. The man explains that they made this decision because Leonora is absent and they are only being guarded by 30 people. Even Shinjo thinks this is the most opportune moment to kill Guy. And given the circumstances, he has no intention of ending this show. At that point, the guys started putting their plan into action. Narumi lured Night Guy into the forest under the pretext of spotting a dragon-like monster. The man assures the Knight that the lizard was recently right where they are. Guy looks around and says they are near the main road leading to the capital, so they should inform the tamers of the monster's presence so that no one gets hurt. Suddenly, Narumi screams as if he's afraid of something. The man points to the side, saying that the monster is there, and Guy then takes a fighting stance. But at that precise moment, Arashi approached him from behind, taking the Knight by surprise. Without hesitation, Arashi casts his blessing and causes a powerful explosion. Narumi manages to fly away and declares that it was dangerous because he could have been hit too. The explosion fails to kill Guy, who jumps out of the rising dust. Due to the suddenness of the events, the Knight was seriously injured. His body was burned by the flames and blood flowed down his face. The man turned around and shouted angrily at Arasi. The man stood at the scene of the explosion and shook himself, claiming that he had struck with all his might, but the Knight was still not dead. Arasi smiled and said that this man is really cool. However, Guy shouldn't be so confident. Arasi reports that the man is on his territory. Traps are scattered throughout the clearing, and Sir Guy falls into one of them. The man doesn't have time to jump back and is struck by another powerful explosion. Arasi recalls that they were the ones who brought him here. The guys had set traps in this place beforehand. Hit by another explosion, The man knelt down and tried to catch his breath. Even though the knight had protected himself with his blessing, he was still hit. Guy states that a surprise attack is a sign of cowardice, and that it is not what he expected from Arashi. The guy says he doesn't care what methods he uses, as long as they allow him to defeat Guy. The rest of Arashi's team is already approaching the knight from behind. Noticing this, Guy gets up and takes a defensive stance. Arashi gives the order to attack and orders that the knight be killed at all costs. The man puts his hand in the inside pocket of his jacket and says he has to stop this. The knight takes a blue sphere from his chest and throws it high into the air. The hero candidates remain frozen in place, without understanding what is happening. But the next moment, the sphere explodes in the open air. It lights up high in the sky like a traffic light. Its light attracts Mito's attention. Kensaki was still outside and also saw the signal. Shinjo stood up from his seat and looked at the sky. The man looked at the traffic light with a desperate expression and declared that Aras had failed. The lightning lit up the sky like the sun in broad daylight. The soldiers spotted it and doubted that it was actually a distress signal. The guards look around and say that Night Guy has not been seen for a long time and wonder if someone could have attacked him. One of the soldiers said they didn't have time to think about it, that they had to run urgently to the signal. But no sooner had he finished speaking than a dagger was plunged into his throat. Shinjo stands behind him, a bloody dagger in his hand. The soldiers watch the scene in shock. Shinjo moves on to the next soldier without hesitation. He says he has nothing against this man, but that he must die. With a single blow, Shinjo kills the frozen man. After that, the guard regained his composure and rushed towards the man. However, he skillfully dodges their attacks. Dodging the blows, Shinjo hits himself, and each time they become fatal. The man remained unperturbed, his face impassive. Shinjo throws the dead guard onto another man. The guard thrusts his spear forward, slowing the body as it flies towards him. Shinjo takes advantage of the man's distraction. Leaping up beside the guard, the brunette plunges a dagger into his body. Shinjo had already managed to take care of half of the people. The remaining people stare at the man in astonishment and ask him why the hero candidate is doing this to them. Shinjo leaped towards him and asked if he had heard his words. It doesn't take him long to kill all the remaining guards. Meanwhile, the fight between Arashi's team and Night Guy continues. The students attack Guy from behind. Two men attempt to attack the knight, striking from different sides. However, the man easily grabbed one of the two by the arm and blocked the second man's blow with his sword. Narumi does not stand back and raises her hand, gathering the power of the wind. He concentrates his energy into the spear. The boy rises into the air and hurls a wind lance at the knight. Another man asks for a blessing of support. Thanks to him, the spear begins to glow red and fills with energy. Guy notices the imminent threat in time. The man jumps to the side, thus dodging the blow. However, he wasn't paying enough attention and ended up being hit by one of the guys. The knight strikes the man with his sword, saying he is too weak. However, the next moment, her eyes widen. The boy used the blessing of steel, thus protecting his hands from the sword, which shattered upon impact. The knight realized that luck was not on his side and stepped aside, declaring that these guys had some very troublesome blessings. Guy tried looking in all directions, which allowed him to notice the approaching danger. Taking advantage of the break, Arasi prepared to strike. The individual caused another powerful explosion, which he directed towards Guy. The man invoked his blessing, thus protecting himself from the blow. However, he was too weakened by everything that was happening, and therefore suffered more serious injuries. Trying to stay upright, Guy planted his sword in the ground. The force of the explosion tore off the knight's left arm. Arasi mocked him, saying the man was too stubborn. Narumi stated that Guy had most likely signaled for reinforcements, and that he had therefore decided to try and buy some time. The knight stopped them, declaring that none of it mattered anymore. Leonora approached them from the forest and laughed up her sleeve when she saw that the boys had managed to corner Guy. Even Aura seemed frightened by Leonora's sudden appearance. Meanwhile, the surviving soldiers from the camp were already tied up. Mito and the others approached and asked Kenzaki what was going on. The young girl took control of one of the guards, forcing him to tie up his colleagues. Kenzaki laughed softly, saying she was only obeying orders. Mito didn't understand what she was talking about, because he didn't know who the girl was connected to. Nagas was surprised that Kenzaki was the type to obey the orders of others. Shinjo emerged from the forest and apologized to Mito, claiming that it was he who had given the order. The headmaster looked at his classmate questioningly. Kenzaki told the brunette that she had caught about 7 people, but the others had managed to escape. Shinjo approaches the girl and tells her not to worry, because he has already taken care of the rest. Mito asks anxiously what the guy did to them, and Shinjo replies that he killed them all. Kenzaki looked at the boy with concern and declared that he was still as ruthless as ever. Mito asked Shinjo why he had done that. The brunette stated that he had decided to take care of them while Arashi fought against Guy. Mito then understands why he couldn't find Arashi anywhere. Nagase thought that the boys still hadn't decided to put their plan into action. Shinjo asked the girl if she still had any doubts. He pointed to the bound soldiers and declared that they were living proof. Mito asked if Shinjo had joined Arashi's team, because he had previously believed that the brunette was on their side. Shinjo interrupts him and declares that he has always only been on his own side. The brunette reminded the leader that he was not the priority at the moment, and that he should therefore direct his anger towards Arashi. Mito realizes that Shinjo is right, so he walks away saying he'll deal with him later. The class representative leads the rest of his classmates. Their main objective now is to find Arashi. Leonora appears in the clearing next to Guy and sneers when she sees the man cornered. The knight looks at the young girl with joy and says that old age is beginning to make itself felt. Narumi observes all this from above and asks Arashi what they will do next. The other students remain frozen in place, awaiting Arashi's order. This man claims they have no other choice but to go all the way. The boys began to doubt this idea because they knew they would not be able to resist Leonora's influence. The young girl confirms their statements, but specifies that the effect of her blessing is less powerful on strong people. However, she claims that all the hero candidates are like children compared to her unparalleled technique. Arasi claims that Leonora was a coward because she would never have won in a fair fight. The young girl thought for a moment, then gave a mocking smile. She says that Arasi resorted to a petty provocation, but that she decided to give in and break their claws. Guy says he expected it from Leonora, but he tries to convince the girl otherwise. The young girl interrupts him and asks him if he remembers that she is a saint. Leonora reminds everyone that God loves her more than anyone else present. As the girl approaches the knight, Arashi decides to act and runs towards them. Guy is about to get up and protect Leonora with his body. However, she places her hand in front of him, forcing him to stay in his place. The smile disappears from the girl's face, and she implores the earth. The ground beneath his feet instantly began to move. Before Arashi could reach the girl, the ground rose up and struck the boy. The blow was struck with such force that the man froze on the spot. However, Leonora does not stop, and this time, she calls upon the wind. Arashi barely has time to recover from the first blow before the ground gives way beneath his feet. Carried away by the wind, the boy is thrown to the side. At that precise moment, a tornado forms around Leonora. Narumi, using her blessing, flies off and catches up with the unconscious Arashi. The remaining students look up at the sky in fear and try to shout to their leader. This only attracts Leonora's attention, who summons fire. One of the students is engulfed by the flames and screams in pain. Leonora does not stop, and this time, she calls upon the power of water. The student standing behind her is enveloped in water, trapped in a kind of bubble. The man panics and shouts that he cannot breathe and asks for help. However, no one dares to approach, and finally the man loses consciousness. Only then does the bubble release him. Narumi continues to hold Arashi's unconscious body in the air and is in no hurry to come down. The other students remain frozen in fear at a distance from Guy and Leonora, hoping that the girl would not touch them. The saint looks at them with a smile and asks them if they have played enough. A shout rang out from above, and everyone understood that they were not finished yet. Arasi regained his composure and shouted that the girl had not yet won. Suddenly, Mito appears on the battlefield with the rest of the students and asks them to stop. Realizing that Leonora was not going to continue the fight, the leader turned his gaze towards Arasi. Mito demands that the boy stop fighting and asks him what Arashi was thinking when he did such a thing. The brown-haired man shouts that the village chief will not be able to stop him because he will not stand idly by like the others. Mito asks the other members of Team Arashi if they agree with their leader's statements. Narumi apologizes to the class representative and confides that she cannot trust Leonora and Guy. Nagase claims to agree with Narumi on this point, and Mito can't say anything to defend them. The girl asks if they should join Arashi even though the fight has already started. Hashimoto reprimands Nagase for his remarks and points out that not everything can be resolved by brute force. Mito is baffled by this whole situation because he can't say Arashi is wrong, but he also can't force his classmates to tolerate mistreatment. Leonora let out a small laugh, adding that the split within their group had happened much faster than she had imagined. The girl looks at the boys menacingly and tells them that the riot has already started, so they cannot simply disperse and act as if nothing has happened. At his words, the students froze. Even those who did not participate in the rebellion felt the danger emanating from Leonora. Someone looked at the girl as if they had been expecting this outcome. Mito, frozen in surprise, did not understand exactly what the saint's words meant. Leonora holds her hand out in front of her and invokes the violent wind. Narumi doesn't want to see his friends suffer, so he disrupts Leonora's airflow by summoning his own. Two tornadoes begin to merge into one, attempting to destroy each other. The men on the ground try to duck down to avoid being caught in the air currents. However, Leonora does not seem to be afraid. She observes the scene calmly and with a smile. Narumi realizes that he is unable to resist the saint's power. The next moment, they and Arashi are caught in the air currents and carried in different directions. The other students are also being attacked. As the tornado begins to weaken, Mito is thrown sideways, but lands safely back on his feet. The other students are not so lucky and can barely get up from the ground. Many people were injured after being caught in the air vortex. One person was more seriously injured following a bad landing. Mito looks around fearfully and asks his classmates if everything is all right. Arasi approaches the leader from the side, blood streaming down his face from his fractured head. The man told Mito to stop panicking since no one had died. Arasi says the village chief can't protect them all, so it's time to make a decision, because at this rate, Leonora will take care of everyone. Mito understands that the situation is desperate, so he draws his sword and goes to protect his friends. Nagaishi's voice can be heard behind them, happy that the village chief has finally understood. The young girl invokes fire and declares that her patience has long since reached its limits. Hashimoto says he doesn't really want to get involved in all of this, but they're at an impasse. Leonora calmly observed everything that was happening without intervening. Today, the class united against a common enemy and stood up to defend those who can no longer fight. Leonora looks at them with a smile and wants to remind the children why she is so precious. For a moment, we are transported to the heart of the forest, not far from the battlefield. Kenzaki glances behind a tree and asks what they are going to do now. Shinjo stands calmly, leaning against a tree, and declares that their time has not yet come. They plan to engage in combat as soon as Leonora uses her enslavement technique, and until then, their classmates will do all the dirty work. Outside, the night was already well advanced, and the source of light was the full moon in the sky. Leonora stood beside Guy, and around them lay many windswept trees. Facing them were Arashi, Narumi, Mito, Nagase, and Hashimoto, ready to join the fight at any moment. Suddenly, Leonora's attention is drawn to Guy, who until that moment had been behind the young girl. The man gets up and walks around the girl, asking her permission to enter the fight first. The young girl acquiesces and, extending her hand, uses force, declaring that she must treat the knight's wounds. Guy froze on the spot, feeling Leonora's divine power fill and envelop his body. The arm torn off by Arashi's blow is beginning to heal. The knight closes his eyes, feeling the pain fade and regaining his strength. When the divine power faded, Guy grasped the sword's hilt with both hands. The man has fully recovered and is now ready to fight the hero candidates again. 5 students prepared to face the strongest knight. Guy's sword did not waver and he took his position. Narumi looked at the recovered knight with disappointment and stated that they had put in a lot of effort to defeat him. Negase claims that they too are stronger now, because they are united and fight together. Leonora spreads her arms and tells the children to start whenever it suits them, because it will be a big challenge for them. The girl also points out that if the boys fail to defeat them, they will not be able to become heroes. Mito decides to attack first and asks the others to cover him. The swords of the old man and the night guy clashed, causing sparks to fly all around. The swords clashed, and looking more closely, the knight saw that Mito had almost sliced his own. Guy watches in horror the result of a blow struck by his opponent. The man decides to jump to the side. Upon observing the damaged sword, Guy realizes that he will not be able to simply block Mito's attacks. Leonora summons the ice and orders it to take on a new form and pierce its target. The ice takes the form of stalactites and rushes towards Mito. Nagase summons fire and directs it towards the danger, claiming it will melt them. When ice encounters a burst of fire, it turns into water. However, Leonora doesn't stop there and asks if the girl can repeat her actions. A new wave appears immediately after the stalactites melt. Mito tries to repel this attack alone, but things don't go well, and several stalactites manage to hit him. Narumi, terrified, stands behind the village chief and asks him how he is. At that precise moment, several large rocks were lifted into the air. Hashimoto asks Leonora how she dares to do that to their leader. Narumi doesn't intend to sit idly by and summons the wind, transforming it into sharp blades. The boy and girl team up and direct their attacks towards Leonora. Contrary to their expectations, the young girl doesn't even try to dodge the attack. Narumi remained frozen in place, not understanding why the young girl was not defending herself. Hashimoto is closely observing the unfolding events. They quickly understand why Leonora didn't try to dodge. A barrier already surrounded her. The attacks crash against the invisible dome, and the stones, breaking into small fragments, fall at the girl's feet. Hashimoto watches the scene in shock. Narumi is unable to say a word. Leonora claims that she is God's favorite, which is why witchcraft and blessings are ineffective on her. Shinjo, hidden unnoticed behind a tree, wondered if it was a blessing from the saint. The boy uses his gift and perceives all of the girl's skills, and notices that her defense indicators are low, although she doesn't need them. A normal physical attack should work on her, but Leonora is protected from it by Guy. Arashi does not intend to remain idle and also joins the fight. He decides to attack Night Guy and kicks him. The man notices that Arashi did not use explosive force this time and assumes that the guy is simply out of breath. The man smiled mockingly and replied that he could defeat the old man without his blessing. Arashi stretches out his arms and announces to Mito that he is going to face Guy. Arashi orders the class leader and his classmates to take care of Leonora. Mito approves of the brown-haired man and begins to think about how to defeat the saint. The blessing is ineffective on the girl, which means that Mito's sword will be of no use to her either. Suddenly, an ordinary sword flies toward the old man to the side. His classmate, unable to fight, understood the situation and decided to give his sword to Mito. The old man drew his sword and thanked the man for his help. Leonora states that Mito is a real treat for the eyes as he has finally shown the necessary determination to fight. Remembering Shinjo, the village chief recounts that someone put his brain back in place and that the man is therefore determined to cut off the girl's head. The man takes off and runs towards Leonora. The girl remains motionless, but summons aerial boomerangs. Mito jumps to the side, trying to avoid hitting the obstacle. Dodging isn't enough, so the guy starts retaliating with his sword. Nagase and Narumi are currently unable to help Arashi or Narumi, so they are waiting for the opportune moment. Hashimoto states that all they can do is observe them and stay away. The young girl leaves Mito with Narumi and Nagase, while carefully observing the fight between the Night Guy and Arashi. Guy and Arashi do not use their blessings and fight hand-to-hand. The man is about to strike the knight in the face, but the knight manages to dodge the attack. As Guy struggles to regain his balance after dodging, Arashi crouches down and knocks him to the ground. The knight watches the scene in shock. Arashi stabs the disoriented knight in the stomach. The man is thrown to the side but remains standing. Arashi explains to the knight that even though his wounds have healed, it has not given him more strength. Guy scoffs at his words and blames the other, claiming that the latter cannot use his blessing. Meanwhile, Leonora directs fireballs towards Mito. The man jumps to the side, dodging each attack, but gets further and further away. Mito understands that the girl is trying to get rid of the guy by acting this way before he has time to reach her. The chief's eyes begin to shine, and he thinks there must be a way to defeat Leonora. Eleanor stops her attacks as soon as Mito moves far enough away. The boy tries to figure out what to do next, while his classmates watch him closely. Leonora states that she expected nothing less from Mito's boyfriend, as few can outwit her technique with such skill. The village chief believes he must either find a way to get closer to the girl or find an opportunity to attack from a distance. The blessing is ineffective on Leonora, so Nagase and the others cannot help her, and furthermore, the saint specializes in long-range attacks. Mito decides to reduce the distance between them by any means necessary and to act as quickly as possible. Leonora notices that the man is enveloped in an unfamiliar glow, and she now seems a little confused. Mito lunges forward with such force that his footprints leave marks on the ground. Leonora reaches out and invokes the power of the wind. Gusts of wind transform into arrows that attempt to reach the attacking elder. However, he dodges the attack with incredible speed, like lightning. This man inevitably achieves his goal at an incredible speed. For the first time in the entire battle, Leonora changes position and sits down on the ground. By touching the ground with her hand, the young girl uses the immersion technique. The ground beneath Mito's feet turns into quicksand and begins to pull him downwards. The old man froze on the spot, and the glow began to fade. At that moment, Leonora calls upon the power of fire. She points it towards Mito, and he is immediately engulfed in flames, causing him to scream in pain. Nagase and Narumi, who had been observing the scene from the edge of the field, rushed to help the leader, but it was too late. Leonora thought that Mito had unconsciously strengthened his body with magic all this time, and that he was able to unleash all his power at once. Observing the unconscious chef, the young girl admitted that he had incredible talent, but that he was still far from her level. Meanwhile, Arashi and Guy continued their fight. Looking at his hands, the man realized that he would not be able to use the explosion, and that he therefore had to find another way to defeat the knight. Guy said he saw doubt on Arashi's face, and seizing the opportunity, launched an attack. The man doesn't have time to react and is hit. Arashi is slashed across the chest by a sword and cries out in pain as he falls to his knees. Clutching his wound to his chest, the boy doesn't understand why he can't defeat an old man. Guy approaches him and asks if that's all Arashi can do without a blessing. This man remembers everything he has experienced in his life and cannot accept the idea that he could lose so easily. Arashi believes he is strong enough to win even without his explosions. Unaware of the sword resting against his shoulder, the boy stood up. Guy looks at Arashi in surprise and asks him how he manages to still be standing. The sword tears through the clothes and sinks into the man's shoulder, but he has no intention of stopping. The knight watches in shock as the boy injures himself while pushing back the sword. Taking advantage of his confusion, Arashi raises his hand to strike. The man delivers a violent blow to his opponent's face. Despite all his injuries, Arashi seems angrier than before. Under the force of the blow, Guy is thrown to the side, unable to stand. With a single blow, Arashi not only knocked out several of the knight's teeth, but also knocked him out. Removing the sword from his shoulder, the boy announced to Guy that he had won. Meanwhile, Mito remembers the time he spent with his class in their world and believes it is his responsibility to protect them all. The village chief gets up and realizes that he cannot stand idly by in the face of his friend's suffering. Leonora was about to attack the other boys, but her attention was drawn to Mito, who stood up and was surrounded by lightning. The man is once again bursting with powerful energy and announces to Leonora that he is already on his way. The young girl looks at the village chief with a smile and tells him that he will not be able to get close to her, no matter how hard he tries. But before she could finish her sentence, Mito appeared next to her. The carefree smile disappears from Leonora's face, and she looks in surprise at the lightning-fast boy. With no expression on his face, the man strikes with his sword. He manages to touch Leonora, who recoils in terror. The man remains motionless, but the energy does not leave his body. The young girl touches the bleeding wound on her hand and thinks she has lost control of the situation. Leonora frowned in pain, but suddenly she realized it was something else. Before she could even realize it, Mito was behind her. Noticing a movement nearby, Leonora turns around abruptly. The girl uses the power of ice and creates a barrier between herself and Mito. However, the man breaks through the ice wall with a single blow. Fragments of her own magic fly towards Leonora, forcing her to retreat. Previously, no one could make the girl move, but now she tries in vain to dodge Mito's attacks. The saint looks over the shoulder of the village chief, who has frozen for a moment, and understands that it was not through inattention. The problem is that Mito has acquired a new blessing and can now move so fast that it is impossible for a person to keep up with him. According to Leonora, a saint, God loves Mito and therefore granted him the blessing he needed. The man replied that he simply asked for the power that would allow him to protect his loved ones. Mito activates his speed power again and points his sword towards Leonora's neck. The young girl remains calm and does not try to dodge. She says that it is still not enough. Leonora uses her power of enslavement and knocks Mito to the ground. Standing over the immobilized man, the young girl declares that she had not intended to use this power, but that she has no choice. Mito looks up at the saint in disappointment and remains unable to move. Shinjo, who had been observing the whole scene, said that Leonora had finally played her trump card. Turning to Kensaki, the brunette declared that the time had come to act. Meanwhile, Leonora watched Mito, who was motionless, with a smile on her lips. It was as if a powerful seal had been placed upon him. The young girl claims that she did not intend to use this enslavement technique, but Mito lives up to her expectations. The village chief tries to defend himself, but the more he resists, the more the pressure intensifies on him. Nagas and Hashimoto run towards them, intending to help them. However, before they could get any closer, Leonora ordered them to stop. All the students are seized by a divine power that freezes them in place. Narumi tried to act but found himself completely immobilized. Leonora states that all the children worked hard, so she considers them to have passed the exam. The young girl looks around her, searching for her knight. Having found him, Leonora declares that she had not foreseen Guy's defeat, but that there is no need to worry because a new knight can always be found. The young girl is convinced that any problem can be solved if the hero candidates are under her control. Narumi says that they really found themselves in a fight that they initially had no chance of winning. Mito is in despair because he thinks that as long as they haven't found a way to resist this technique, they won't succeed. Leonora claims that she was tasked with performing the ritual to summon the hero candidates because she has the ability to control them. Otherwise, their existence could become a threat to the country. While the girl was explaining the situation to the losing students, several daggers flew towards her from behind. The young girl invoked the power of the earth, which rose up and protected her from the weapon. As the ground gives way beneath her feet, Leonora spots a weapon she has never seen before on a hero candidate. Leonora realizes that Shinjo attacked her and says she wondered where he had hidden after killing her people. Shinjo approached her from the side with a nonchalant step. Approaching, the man said he was surprised that a simple man like himself had been honored with the saint's attention. Leonora says that the guy seemed strange to her from the start, because after receiving a useless blessing, he showed no reaction. The girl said she was disappointed in him because the boy got into a fight he was initially destined to lose. Shinjo replies that he will decide whether the fight is lost or not. Leonora smiled and asked the boy to prove the truth of his statements. The girl orders Shinjo to freeze, and he obeys, defeated by the enslavement technique. The guy seems to be testing this technique. Her hands are enveloped in an aura that resembles many golden cords. Shinjo tries to move and feels resistance. The girl claims that the boy should have realized a long time ago that as long as she masters this technique, she is invincible. However, before she could finish her sentence, a bullet hit her in the shoulder, making her jump and scream. Smoke is still coming out of the rifle barrel. Shinjo managed to break free from her grasp and claims that Leonora successfully covered the vital points, which was exactly what he expected. Clutching her wound to her, the girl asked why he was allowed to move, since they had used the technique of slavery on him. The man did not answer his question and aimed again, firing another shot. This time, the ball hit the girl in the thigh. The girl has never seen a firearm, so she asks what kind of weapon Shinjo possesses that his defense cannot keep up. Shinjo replies that it is one of the deadliest weapons in his world, but he rarely uses it because ammunition is limited. Leonora told herself to calm down. She didn't know why her technique wasn't working on this guy, but that wasn't the most important thing at the moment. The girl invokes the power of fire and directs it towards the boy. The last thing the girl sees is the guy trying to cover his face with his hands. Convinced that the attack had hit its target, the girl declares that Shinjo had let his guard down too soon. But the next moment, her face expresses surprise. Where the man had stood just moments before, there was nothing left but a burning coat. Leonora doesn't understand where this man could have gone, because just a second ago she saw the fire approaching him. The girl hears a click behind her and realizes that Shinjo is already behind her and has armed the gun. Shinjo recounts that, following his fight against Mito, the boy realized that she was not strong in hand-to-hand combat and that her technique was ineffective against him. Leonora frowned in pain and asked why her technique didn't work only on Shinjo. The man smiled and said that he didn't understand it himself, but that it was his plan, even though he wasn't sure it would work. Shinjo remembers the evening when he brought Kanzaki to his room and asked him to use his control power on him. The young girl then remained frozen, frightened, in front of the door, not understanding why this man needed this. Kanzaki blushed and looked at Shinjo in confusion, saying that she wasn't interested in that kind of thing. The man did not understand what the girl was talking about and repeated the question. Shinjo stated that during his research on techniques, he had found no information regarding the enslavement technique, but that he had instead read an interesting fact. The man explains that if two submission techniques are applied to a person, the technique applied first prevails. The girl asks if it is true that if she uses a control technique on the boy, Leonora's enslavement technique will be ineffective. Shinjo thinks that's the case, and it could also work if Kanzaki's technique is stronger than Leonora's defense. The young girl is surprised by his assumptions, because her technique cannot be compared to the saint's powers. Shinjo believes that the main difference lies in their hierarchical level. Kanzaki's skill level is 1, and Leonora's is 3, but the girl's control must not be interrupted in favor of the saint. The man remembers that previously, Steady's technique had gained the upper hand over Kanzaki's control. Previously, Shinjo believed this was due to the scientist's higher level of ability. The solution to the puzzle lay in the fact that Steady had managed to apply his technique to the monsters much earlier than Kanzaki. Shinjo surmises that Leonora's enslavement technique must operate according to the same principles. However, the only way to know if their assumptions are correct is to put them into practice. Therefore, they must study the control range. Returning to the moment of the fight, Leonora suddenly realizes that Kanzaki might be involved. Shinjo, with a gun pointed at the saint's temple, declares that the young girl has finally understood. The man confirms his suspicions, saying that he is now under Kensaki's control. Leonora clenches her teeth in anger and calls the girl an insolent imitator. Shinjo keeps his eyes fixed on the saint and declares that her end is near. The pistol clicked in his hands. Contrary to expectations, Shinjo did not kill Leonora. After the click, the young girl turned around, surprised as if something was restricting her movements. The girl's hands were found handcuffed as before to restrain Kensaki. Shinjo borrowed these handcuffs from them, hoping they would block Leonora's miraculous power. The girl looks at the boy angrily and asks him what he intends to do to her. The classmates finally regained their mobility and began to move closer together. Shinjo said he would let Leonora go if she could send them back to their world immediately. The girl claims that it is useless because she only possesses the summoning technique, and another technique is needed to bring them back home. Shinjo activates his blessing and realizes that the girl is not lying, since her status does not allow her to master such a technique. The boy asks why the girl lied about their possibility of returning if they defeat the Demon King. Leonora explains that bringing people from another world requires an enormous amount of energy, which they borrowed from God. In other words, their presence here is God's will, and once their mission is accomplished, they will most likely be sent back home. Shinjo assumes that the girl herself doesn't really believe it. Leonora confirms his statements, asserting that previous hero candidates hadn't even managed to approach the Demon King. Shinjo guesses the answer, but still asks what happened to the previous hero candidates. Leonora replies that almost all of them were killed by the Demon King's army, but some may have survived, but their whereabouts are unknown. Anyone else would have given up after those words, so Shinjo understands why the girl didn't want to tell them. Leonora explains that they cannot simply settle here, because the Demon King's army will attack sooner or later, and the men will then be forced to accept the fight. Shinjo realizes that despite all their efforts, they still have no choice. The girl agrees with him and says she is willing to turn a blind eye to the incident and help them if they let her go immediately. However, the man does not intend to follow her and brandishes a dagger. Determined to settle the score with her, Mito grabbed her hand and asked her to stop. Shinjo asked why the village chief decided to intervene, since they thought he had already decided. Mito claims that he only agreed because they thought Leonora knew a way to get them home. In this situation, the village chief wishes to retain the status of candidate for the title of hero, but Shinjo reminds them that they have already fomented a rebellion. Leonora ends their argument and declares that Mito is right. The young girl admits to having gotten a little carried away, but they can pretend nothing happened. Shinjo finds her proposal logical, but he states that he cannot catch her off guard a second time. The boy fears that Leonora will try to kill Kensaki as soon as he is freed, and that their chances of winning will then be nil. Mito says they will not be able to escape punishment for killing a saint, so they will make Leonora swear an oath and let her go. Hashimoto agrees with the class representative and states that not everyone knows how to fight, so if they become criminals, defeating the Demon King is out of the question. Nagase also agrees with them and states that they will find a way to make Leonora keep her promise. Narumi takes Shinjo's side, stating that the girl almost killed them and that nothing will stop her from doing it again. Mito understands her concerns, but reminds her that they will have no chance if they kill her now. Shinjo understands the class representative's concerns, as he wants to ensure the safety of the entire class, and the brunette is not sure that everyone will be able to survive. At a certain point, Shinjo perceives a moment when Mito is no longer monitoring his actions. At the same moment, a gunshot is heard. Smoke is escaping from the rifle barrel, indicating that a shot has been fired. Mito turned his gaze towards Shinjo and saw him pull out a pistol and now pointed at Leonora. The projectile struck the saint squarely in the forehead, making her appear shocked. Mito starts yelling at Shinjo, asking him why he did that. Leonora collapses to the ground and her strength leaves her. His shocked classmates stared at him, unable to believe how coldly Shinjo had killed a man. Regaining his senses, the village chief tries to grab the brunette, but she has already managed to get away. A smoke bomb was thrown at their feet between them. The smoke obscured Shinjo's silhouette from the eyes of his comrades, who had told them at the end that they would meet again. Mito tried to find his classmate in the smokescreen. However, all his attempts were in vain. When the smoke cleared, there was no one left. Mito fell to his knees in despair and asked why everything had happened this way. Hashimoto stated that Shinjo had committed an unforgivable act by killing Leonora before they could reach an agreement. Nagase sneered, saying that this guy, as always, only thought of himself. Narumi, for her part, is beginning to guess Shinjo's motivations, but prefers not to reveal them publicly. Kenzaki slowly approaches Leonora's body and cannot believe that it is all over. The girl didn't think Shinjo would actually kill the saint, but everything happened exactly as he had said. She remembers how, before the attack began, the brunette had explained to the young girl how everything would unfold afterwards. Shinjo stated that their main objective would be to capture Leonora and find out from her how they could return to their world. If during the interrogation, it turns out that the girl cannot hand them over, then Shinjo will kill her. Kenzaki agreed with his words, but she didn't think it would actually happen. Shinjo warns that if returning to their world proves difficult, Mito will begin to protect Leonora. The brunette warns that, in that case, he will kill the saint himself and flee. Kenzaki looked at the boy in astonishment and asked him if he really wanted to take responsibility for the saint's murder. Shinjo claims that this is precisely why he let several soldiers escape, in order to give the impression that he was acting alone. If he is the only one considered a criminal, the boys will be able to return home without hindrance. Kenzaki thinks that things may not go as planned, but the man advises him to use his influence to negotiate with the country. The girl nods and asks him what Shinjo will do next. The man then replied that he could manage everything himself, so there was no need to worry about him. Kenzaki understands that everything went as planned, but she is tormented by a feeling of guilt. She looks up at the dark sky and worries about the fate that awaits Shinjo. Meanwhile, in one corner of the country, the moon turned bright pink. The entire space around the dark castle was imbued with dark energy. We see a man wondering what these hero candidates from another world, blessed by God, look like. The knight reports to his master, indicating that they have repeatedly tried to defeat them, but without success. The owner told him not to worry, as their actions in enemy territory are limited, but that heroes will come of their own accord sooner or later. We are introduced to the Supreme General of the Demon King's army, the Wind King Winberg, who believes that the war against humanity is now much more interesting. Several days pass after the events that occurred on the battlefield between the hero candidates and Leonora. Shinjo left the group of his own volition and now travels alone. He had already managed to pack a backpack with belongings, as if he had guessed that the battle would have such an outcome. The man stopped near a stream to drink and rest a little. Shinjo has been walking for 2 days now, and according to the map, he will soon arrive at a city. In the distance, the man sees a mountain and wonders if he should climb higher to assess the situation. He believes it is wise to familiarize himself with the city from afar in case he needs to retreat urgently. After climbing high enough, the man sees a small town surrounded by high walls and realizes that it will take half a day to get there. Shinjo arrives in town when it is already dark outside. As he walked through the thickets near the walls, the man thought that this situation was advantageous to him. Shinjo doubts they will let him through the main gates, he who killed the saint. He doesn't know what they can do to him. Taking advantage of the lack of visible movement on the wall, Shinjo throws a hook with a rope. Without forgetting to look around him, the man climbs quickly. After a while, Shinjo manages to climb the wall and finds himself on the main street. Looking around him, the man thought to himself that he should first get some money. A few minutes later, the man returns with a bag of money he borrowed from the dead soldiers. As he walked down the street, his attention was drawn to a noise coming from one of the houses. Shinjo stops near the bar and thinks it's the best place to gather information. The man enters and sees many people who are already a little drunk. The man behind the bar spots the newcomer, greets him and asks him what he would like to order. Shinjo calmly approaches and sits down at the bar, leaving his luggage aside. The boy lowers his head and asks for beer and something to eat. A visibly drunk man sitting next to him said he had never seen him before and asked him if he was a traveler. Shinjo replies that he had to flee his hometown and is now looking for a way to earn a living. The man surmises that the boy's hometown has been attacked by the Demon King's army and claims that it is a great disaster. Shinzi is pleased that the man invented this story himself and asks him if he knows where undocumented refugees are hired. The establishment owner serves the man a beer and tells him that, in that case, he should become an adventurer. Shinjo accepts the cup and asks what this organization does. The man explains that it is a guild that assigns its members various missions, mainly to kill monsters. The visitor claims that this is not a job for the weak and that the guy could lose his life there, but the owner assures that the man is not as simple as he seems. The visitor asks if the owner is right, but the latter confirms his own statements, remembering that the man is traveling alone. Shinjo is delighted with this proposal and asks how he can become an adventurer. The owner says the guy just has to sign up with the downtown guild. They accept everyone because they are short of manpower. Shinjo asks the man how he knows so much and learns that the owner was himself an adventurer, but retired following an injury. After a few moments, the man placed plates of food in front of the brunette. Shinjo had a hearty dinner and found a place to spend the night, where he spent the rest of the night. When sunlight began to stream through the window, the boy woke up. Shinjo slowly packs his bags and leaves, planning to visit the guild today. On the first floor, the boy meets the girl, thanks her for hosting him for the night, and tells her that he will stay with them for a while. The young girl accepts the money offered to her and thanks the man for choosing them. As he left the building, Shinjo reflected on the fact that the girl hadn't said anything even when she saw his face. This leads this man to believe that photography has not yet been invented in this world. Shinjo decides that there is no point in being too cautious now and heads towards the guild. After crossing the city on foot, the man stops near a large building on which hangs a coat of arms depicting crossed swords. By observing the emblem, Shinjo guesses that it is the Adventurers Guild. The man enters the building and sees many people dressed in combat gear. Each person then split into small groups and discussed a topic of their own. Some laugh at the situation they find themselves in, while others observe with interest the strange objects they have managed to acquire. Further into the room, Shinjo notices a young girl standing on the other side of the counter and assumes that this is the reception desk. The man approaches and says he wants to register as an adventurer. The young girl indicates that in this case, he must pay a registration fee equivalent to 1 silver coin. The girl asks the boy if that suits him, and he agrees, handing her a coin. After receiving the contribution, the young girl asks for the name, age, and origin in order to complete the registration form. Shinjo is considering not revealing his real name. The man introduces himself as a mermaid, says he is 17 years old and that his city was destroyed by the army of the Demon King. The young girl claims that this information will be sufficient for registration. Shinjo introduced himself using his code name from his home planet and thanked the girl for her help. Once the girl has written all the information on a piece of paper, she stamps it and indicates that the registration is complete. She raises her finger and says she will inform the type of adventurer's activities. Each adventurer is assigned a rank based on their exploits and abilities. The higher the rank, the more difficult the task and the greater the reward. The girl informs him that Shinjo has the lowest rank, F, and tells him that he must complete missions and gain reputation in order to improve his rank. The girl points to the query table and tells the boy that he should choose F-rank queries. Shinjo approaches the board and begins to study the existing requests. Rank F requests mainly consist of gathering medicinal plants and eliminating kobolds. Shinjo takes the request in hand and tells himself that he should accept it, since he has never heard of kobolds before. As the man tries to decide where to begin, he receives a call. A group of several men approached him and told him that they had never seen him before, and that he should therefore not confront the kobolds, because these creatures would kill him. Shinjo is furious that someone is interfering in his affairs. All eyes turn towards the assembly, as if frozen, awaiting what would follow. Shinjo turns his back on them and advises them to turn around and leave without making any unnecessary noise. The guys are furious that he's giving them advice and ask him why he's acting so arrogantly. Other adventurers are watching the scene from the sidelines and say it will be difficult for the guy since they are already targeting him. The team leader approaches Shinjo and asks him who taught the boy good manners. He leans forward, intending to grab the brunette. However, before he could do anything, Shinjo intercepted his hand. For a moment, the man was bewildered by such speed. Shinjo looked at the man calmly. Frightened by that look, the leader began to break free from the steel embrace. However, his attempts were unsuccessful, and the grip tightened even further. The man realizes he cannot escape alone, so he calls his friends for help. The other 2 men surround Shinjo and want to attack him from different sides. The brunette calmly observes their actions and understands that they pose no threat. Sometime later, the 3 men lay unconscious on the ground. The adventurers surrounded them with interest, trying to make sure they weren't imagining things. Shinjo still holds his order and calmly walks through the crowd towards the exit. This man is disillusioned with mid-level adventurers and believes they are far weaker than any candidate for the title of hero. Stepping out of the building and finding himself on a busy city street, Shinjo decides it's time for him to fulfill the order. According to the information on the card, the man is heading towards the forest. Shinjo walks through the thick forest and looks around him. According to the information received, the kobold's lair should be in the vicinity. Suddenly, his attention is drawn to something on the ground. Paw prints appear before his eyes. A trail of footprints from a mysterious animal leads deeper into the forest. Looking at them, Shinjo realizes they are quite fresh. The tracks lead towards the bushes, and the boy compares them to those of an animal. Shinjo plunges into the bushes, following a well-marked path that leads deeper into the thicket. The man looks around and notices another set of footprints. The creature conceals its presence well, leading Shinjo to believe that he has finally stumbled upon a kobold. At that precise moment, the man had the impression that this creature was already standing behind him. Shinjo manages to react and jump to the side, thus dodging the sword. The beast, resembling a wolf but standing on two legs, holds a sword in its hands which it apparently took from humans. Shinjo barely has time to properly observe the monster before another kobold emerges from behind the bushes, a club in hand. The man easily dodges the blow and sits down on the ground, scooping up some dirt in his palm. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Shinjo throws dirt at the kobold. The projectile hits the second creature in the eyes, forcing it to close them. While one kobold tries to get rid of the sand that is getting in its eyes, the second tries to attack Shinjo from behind. However, without turning around to face it, the man kicks the approaching monster in the face. The creature loses its balance and falls on its back, dropping the sword from its hands. Shinjo grabbed the sword and raised it to strike. Without hesitation, the weapon penetrated the body of the kobold lying on the ground. The second monster was watching the scene from the side and now seems a little scared. While the kobold watches its own kind, Shinjo takes out his throwing daggers and hurls them towards the monster. The creature has no time to react, and the knives sink into its body. Shinjo moves away a little from the creatures he has killed. The boy uses his gift to study a new type of monster. Given their status, Shinjo thinks killing them isn't that difficult, and he wonders if he shouldn't kill a few more to earn more money. After a while, the man returns to the guild building and forces everyone present to stop moving. Shinjo approaches the young girl who had previously enrolled him in the guild. The man spreads a mountain of severed kobold ears on the table in front of her. Shinjo explains that he decided to bring them as proof that he had killed the monsters. The girl looks at the mountain of ears in surprise and asks if the guy really killed them all by himself. Shinjo confirms his statements and affirms that kobolds were more difficult to hunt than to kill. During this mission, the man realized that his combat skills were sufficient, but that he was not very good at territorial reconnaissance. The girl asks him if he has ever worked in another guild, but he replies that he is new to this sector. The girl says she understands and asks him to wait a little while they prepare his reward. Slowly but surely, the day is coming to an end. Wandering through the streets where night has already fallen, Shinjo throws a heavy bag of money into the air. It turns out that the sum is much higher than he expected, which suggests that one can make a fortune even with such insignificant monsters. Shinjo believes he will need money in the future, so he plans to stay in this town and work as an adventurer. The man decides that he must make contact with other adventurers in order to obtain more useful information. Suddenly, someone blocks Shinjo's path. The boy is greeted by a tall blonde man who greets Shinjo cheerfully. The brunette understands that this man will be stronger than the other members of the guild and asks him why the blonde came to see him. The man says his name is Lyle and that he is a B-rank adventurer, tasked with resolving internal conflicts among all the adventurers in this city. Shinjo understands that this will not end well. The man tensed his muscles, asking if it was the brunette who had beaten up his boys. Shinjo remains calm and maintains that it was the boys who attacked him first. Lyle pointed at the brunette and said he was lying because his friend said otherwise. Shinjo realizes he has no chance of proving his point of view in this discussion and simply gives up. The adventurer attacks the man, stating that he will have to answer for his actions. Shinjo remains motionless and does not react to the approaching man. As the fist approaches her head, the brunette takes a fluid step to the side, avoiding the collision. This happens with each subsequent shot. The man cannot keep up with his opponent's speed. Layla starts to get angry and shouts that Shinjo won't get rid of him so easily. The man leans on his left leg and pivots on himself. He raises his right leg to Shinjo's head height and prepares to deliver a spinning back kick. But before he could strike, the brunette tripped Layla. Having no support at the moment, the man collapses to the ground. The fall makes Lyle cry out in pain. Shinjo steps aside and declares that the man is self-taught because there are too many empty spaces and the technique is too obvious. Lyle does not tolerate these comments and jumps up. However, even the element of surprise does not allow him to stand up to the candidate for the title of hero. Shinjo calmly intercepts his arm and twists it. The next moment, the man found himself pinned to the ground, face down. Shinjo notices that Lyle is not used to fighting humans, which is understandable given that he is a demon hunter. The adventurer became angry and asked why Shinjo was attacking those who were weaker than him when he was much stronger. The man pinned to the ground explains that there has been a misunderstanding and offers to tell him everything from the beginning. When Lyle regains his senses and decides to listen to the guy, Shinjo lets him go, and they go together to the nearest bar. After the brunette explained in detail what had happened, the man apologized to her for his behavior. Shinjo and Lyle were sitting at a table, having dinner while drinking strong beverages. At one point, the adventurer looks away and admits to having taken these guys at their word. Seeing the bruised trio kneeling near their table, Lyle admits he should have checked everything before attacking. The man ordered the boys to sit quietly and reflect on their behavior. The adventurers first apologized to the leader, then to Shinjo himself for their behavior. The brunette changed the subject, explaining that although they had already resolved this situation, she wanted to ask Lyle a few questions. The man confesses to being guilty in front of the other person and says he is ready to answer all their questions. Shinjo, bringing his cup of drink closer, declares that he is a traveler. He joined the adventurers to save money for the trip, but he has another reason. Lyle states that the guy's already very strong, so it's clearly not about finding him a companion. Shinjo takes a quiet sip from his cup. After that, the man said he was looking for a way to get to another world. His words provoke cries of surprise from Lyle and his subordinates. The guys are starting to whisper that the movement most likely exists, since the hero candidates came from another world. Shinjo confirms their statements and declares that he must go to where the candidates are coming from. Lyle thought about it and said that it would require special equipment, but they weren't experts in that area. Shinjo knows that this is not something that will be discovered easily, but he will need the slightest clue. Lyle suggests that this man turn to the wise Elben, as he is very competent in this matter. His words intrigued Shinjo, who asked who this wise man was. Lyle is surprised by his words because he is talking about an elf, the king's advisor. Shinjo said he had heard of him, but didn't think he actually existed. While the boy was studying books in the library, he saw many references to the wise elf. Elves are long-lived creatures who live deep in the forests, and so few of them remain that they have almost become a legend. Lyle claims that the sage is over 100 years old, therefore he knows a lot and is also a talented magician. Shinjo reflects on the fact that elves are unique in that they borrow the powers of spirits to use magic. Even though the sage does not know the return technique, his magic will allow Shinjo to return home. One of Lyle's protégés intervenes in the conversation and asks if the sage is still alive, because there has been no news of him lately. Lyle laughs at his own words and declares that he doesn't know anymore himself. The man apologizes for not being able to help Shinjo, but Shinjo claims that they shared useful information with him. Finishing his drink, the man declares that this information is more than sufficient. Shinjo gets up from the table and apologizes, saying it's late and he's going back to his room. Before the man leaves, Lyle stops him and asks if they can ask a question. Without waiting for permission, the man asks why Shinjo needs this path to another world. The man smiled and invited the adventurers to discover it for themselves. Lyle, surrounded by the children in his care, remains seated at the table and meditates on the boy's words. Shinjo slowly leaves the room. The following days passed in an unchanging routine. Shinjo arrives at the guild, accepts a mission and completes it, after which he returns to receive his reward. The young girl from the guild gives Shinjo his reward and tells him that he worked well today. The week went on like this, and the boy had already managed to save a sufficient amount. Upon leaving the guild building, Shinjo runs into Lyle and his protégés, who together offer him a drink. The brunette walks past them and says he doesn't have time for that today. Lyle assumes that Shinjo is simply exhausted, which is why he has no intention of pressuring him. A man walking down a busy street looks at a piece of paper and thinks he has obtained enough information about the sage. The wise man's name is Elben Kelleth. 10 years ago, he was an advisor to the king, but he retired and settled on the western border. Shinjo decides that it is pointless for him to stay any longer in the city and that he will now go and meet the sage. Meanwhile, we return to Alpha City, where the hero candidates have returned. We meet the commander of the 8th Detachment of the Order of the Holy Knights, whose name is Heinrich. He claims that he has been monitoring the candidates for the title of hero for a month and wants to know if they have any complaints. Mito sits down opposite the blue-haired man and says that they, on the contrary, are very grateful to him because he is very kind to them. The man rejoices in this and declares that each of these men constitutes a valuable fighting unit for their country and therefore deserves respect. Hashimoto thanks him. She thinks that this guy doesn't look anything like Leonora, but it arouses some suspicions. The commander suggests moving on to the main topic and reports that, at yesterday's meeting, it was decided that the hero candidates must prove themselves in action. Mito clarifies whether this means they will be sent to the front lines. Henry becomes serious and declares that this is exactly what they want to do, Pointing to a map, the man explains that fighting is still ongoing today along the western border. It was decided to send the candidates to one of the hot spots on the front line between the kingdom of Valdora and the sacred land of Digrist. Mito claims they understood everything, but decides to ask the commander if he remembers their agreement. Henry explains that, in accordance with their agreement, they will take care of those who lack combat skills. Mito and Hashimoto breathe a sigh of relief. The commander states that he will assign them other tasks, as they do not have sufficient resources to provide for those who are not working. Mito remembers Naomi's condition and says that even the boys will be happy about it. Hashimoto decides to ask them when they plan to leave. Henry explains that they have little time, so they will leave early tomorrow morning and asks that this information be passed on to the others. After the meeting, Mito and Hashimoto leave the main hall. The young girl is very happy to have managed to reach an agreement with the captain regarding her classmates. Mito supports her, but can't help but think that everything is happening too easily. The boys think it's because they killed Leonora, who was the only person capable of controlling them. After a few seconds of silence, Hashimoto sighed and said she wondered where Shinjo had gone. After his words, a heavy silence settled between the men. Mito remembers that immediately after Leonora's murder and Shinjo's disappearance, the boys returned to the capital. They informed the bishop that the saint had been killed. The bishop could not believe his eyes and kept asking who had managed to defeat Leonora and how. Nagase stated that she was killed by Shinjo, who is also one of the candidates for the title of hero. After his words, panic seized the guards. After some time, the bishop asked where the murderer was now. Nagase replied that Shinjo had fled the scene of the crime, which was predictable from a traitor. The soldiers began to talk about the need to organize a hunt, but first to make sure that the saint was really dead. The bishop expresses his doubts about the possibility of Shinjo fleeing alone, as this would play into the hands of the other candidates. His accusations anger Arashi because this guy really didn't help Shinjo escape. The bishop states that he does not wish to suspect the candidates himself. However, it cannot be 100% certain that they are not all in collusion. Mito, who had always spoken on behalf of the whole class, chose for the first time to remain silent and not participate in the conversation. One of the soldiers turned to the bishop and told him that he had personally seen everything. He recounts that the brave hero candidates attempted to protect the saint, but they failed to stop Shinjo, which resulted in the saint's death. The other soldiers present in the camp that day confirmed his account, stating that they too had seen everything with their own eyes. The bishop, initially negative, calmed down after their remarks. The old man said he could trust the words of Leonora's soldiers and asked if Shinjo was really that strong. Mito claims that Shinjo is very strong and secretive enough not to show it to anyone. His words gave the bishop pause for thought. After a few moments of silence, the old man suggested discussing all the details in the inner room. The students and the bishop were preparing to leave, and no one noticed Kensaki, who was standing behind the column and using the controls to direct the soldiers. The girl made the soldiers say these words and breathe a sigh of relief when she realized that Shinjo's plan had worked. Mito followed the bishop and silently thanked Kensaki for allowing them to successfully complete this step. However, this does not improve the mood of the chief, who still seems upset. Hashimoto asks if his mood is related to Shinjo and declares that this guy doesn't deserve any attention. Mito smiled at her words and said that perhaps the girl was right. The man slowed down a little and walked behind Hashimoto. Despite his agreement with the girl, the boy believes that what happened to Shinjo is his fault. As a class representative, he had to protect them all, without exception. Mito decides that he must protect everyone at all costs. Currently, the class representative and Hashimoto are meeting with the rest of the students. Mito informed them that the decision had been made to send them to the front and ordered them to begin forming the tactical group. Some students feared they would have to participate in real fights. Nugget asked why they only started to get scared now if they themselves wanted to join the fighting group. The two boys were embarrassed to have been reprimanded by a girl. Hano asked if they were going to go on this mission alone. Mito explains that Heinrich will accompany them with the 8th squad of knights, thus making the entire class part of his squad. Kenzaki approached the village chief and asked him if he had any information about Shinjo. Mito claims that a reward is offered for the boy's capture and that they are actively searching for him, but there are still no leads. Kenzaki seems upset. On one hand, she is worried about the lack of news, but she understands that if there is news, it will mean that the boy is in danger. Mito senses the girl's mood and asks her if she is really worried about the traitor. Nage summons fire and declares that if she meets Shinjo, she will personally reduce him to ashes. It would seem that only Kanzaki understands Shinjo's true intentions. She moves away from the group and thinks she might like to leave with this boy. As planned, the 8th Detachment, under Henry's command, and the hero candidates set off at dawn. Some rode horses, others walked. All the soldiers surrounded the food wagons in case they had to defend themselves. The soldiers of the 8th Detachment wore a white uniform different from that of the other soldiers in the country. The formation advanced in complete silence, interrupted only by the clicking of horses' hooves. The cavalry marched at the head of the procession, while the candidates for heroism brought up the rear almost at the end. Arasi, on horseback, was visibly unhappy about something, but he remained silent. One of the girls who were walking said she was tired and asked when there would be a rest area. Hashimoto, who was walking in front, turned to her and replied that they had stopped for lunch not long ago, and that they were therefore going to walk until nightfall. Many boys have not had horses, and now they complain of being tired and would like to have a car. Suddenly, everyone hears Arasi demanding that they stop. The guys froze in impatience, and a few seconds later they ask the guy what happened. Arashi points to the bushes on the side and says there are monsters in them. After his words, all the students tensed up, anticipating the battle. At that moment, one of the members of the 8th Squad began to approach them and asked them why they had stopped. Mito apologized and said that a group of monsters was hiding nearby. The soldier began to look around him, but finding nothing, he declared that the men had received an order and therefore did not have the right to stop without authorization. Throughout this time, Arasi had been tense, and now the current situation was making him angry. The boy moved his horse a little closer and grabbed the soldier by the throat. The man didn't have time to realize what was happening when his frightened horse ran away, and he found himself hanging in midair. This attracted even more people, and Mito then ordered Arashi to stop. Holding the soldier up in the air, the boy asked why he had to obey someone so insignificant. However, the situation quickly changed when enormous claws appeared right next to the boys. Arashi managed to dodge the blow and looked towards the bushes that had distracted him. No longer wishing to have anything to do with the soldier, the boy let him go. The soldier fell to the ground and cried out in pain. The soldier's arrival diverted attention, and the boys temporarily forgot Arashi's words about monsters. Taking advantage of the general distraction, monsters resembling giant rabbits with long, sharp claws emerged from the bushes. At the sight of the monsters, the soldiers became alarmed and began to prepare to attack the enemy. However, the rabbit's claws were not going to wait and rush to attack. The monsters leaped nimbly from side to side, dodging blows. The monster got too close to one of the soldiers. With a single blow, the rabbit's claw knocked the sword from the soldier's hands. The weapon veered to the side and lodged in the ground a few meters from the man. The monster managed to disarm the enemy and was getting closer and closer. The soldier contemplated his imminent death in despair and could not utter a word. Before the monster can strike, it is swept away by the shockwave. As soon as the monsters appeared on the battlefield, Arashi rushed into the battle. The man kicked the monster away, pushing it away from the soldier. Arashi, dismounting from his horse during the attack, approached the rabbit's claw and crushed its head. The soldier watched in astonishment as his savior acted. Seeing what had happened to their parent, the other monsters did not dare to approach. At one point, the soldier regained his senses and thanked Arasi for saving him. The man did not react to his words. He simply rubbed the back of his neck and told the soldier not to get in his way. Arashi was the first to rush into battle, striking the monsters. One by one, the rabbit's claws were killed by the angry man. It was as if all this time an energy had accumulated in Arasi and was trying to escape. The guy got really worked up, trying to release the tension, and saw the fight as an opportunity to express his anger. His classmates simply watched him from the sidelines, noticing that the boy's outbursts of anger were getting even stronger. When there were no more monsters, Arashi passed by their bodies and thought that it wasn't enough. This man believes that with such success, he will never be able to catch up with anyone. Arashi remembers standing there, unable to move, while Shinjo held the gun pointed at Leonora's head. Shaitan himself wanted to take care of the saint, but Shinjo didn't give him the chance. Observing the brunette at that moment, Arashi thought that he had been behaving very strangely from the beginning. Back in their world, Shinjo no longer paid attention to anything the brown-haired man said. Looking back, Arashi realized that the boy had never cared about what was going on around him, not even from the very beginning. During their last argument in class, the brown-haired man had already sensed something strange. Despite his behavior and appearance, Shinjo was not weak. Arasi was happy to have received the blessing of the explosion. He then thought that he would be able to surpass Shinjo because he did not possess any exceptional power. But this did not happen. Mito approached Arashi, looking thoughtful, and asked him why he had always been in a bad mood lately. The brown-haired man approached his horse and mounted it, replying that nothing had happened to him. Continuing on his way, Arashi stated that he did not like having his conduct dictated by pathetic people. Sometime later, the detachment successfully reached the western border of Digress' sacred land and stopped at Fort Traz. The border consisted of a huge castle fortress and a high wall. The border was constantly under control, so soldiers were permanently stationed on the wall. Guards are stationed all around the perimeter and are closely monitoring the situation. At the border, the squad was greeted by a young blonde girl named Amelia, commander of the 4th Squad of the Order of the Holy Knights. The young woman introduces herself and explains that she was recently appointed front commander. The hero candidates stand behind Commander Heinrich, listening attentively to the young girl. Heinrich approached her and asked her what had happened to Commander Benken. The young girl announces that the commander died a week ago, and her words send shivers down the men's spines. Amelia says she would really like the boys to rest after the trip, but now is not the time. Before the girl could finish her sentence, a noise was heard behind her. Soldiers burst into the room and announce that the Demon King's army is attacking. Amelia explains to the hero candidates that they don't have time to rest, and that she therefore hopes they will help them. Mito understands that the situation is urgent and agrees to help. Turning to the class, he ordered the boys as their leader to prepare for battle. Arashi is visibly satisfied with this result and ready to join the fight. A bell rang from the fortress's bell tower, announcing the advance of the Demon King's army. In the distance, a multitude of monsters of all kinds were already visible and approaching. The hero candidates had never seen such spectacles before. Seeing the number of enemies from the wall, the school children fell into a stupor and trembled with fear. Henry gave the order to open fire in order to reduce the enemy forces before they could approach the front. A squad of archers took up position and prepared to fire. The members of the Holy Knights began to invoke the blessings of fire in order to consume the demons. At a single command, the steri and fireballs were launched towards the advancing army. The first ranks of the demons were the primary target. However, even the arrows that pierced the demons' bodies failed to stop them. Mito observes the scene in horror and declares that the enemy is not even attempting to retreat after this attack. Amelia mounted her horse and declared that this would not kill the demons. She explains to Mito that demons are more resilient than humans, so what works on humans won't work against them. The village chief then asks what they should do. Amelia states that she will lead the 4th Squad, while the hero candidates will join Heinrich, who is leading the attack on the raiders. The man approaches and says he was going to offer him everything he could count on, but he notices that someone is eager to join the fight. Mito froze for a moment, not understanding what was being said. Neges forces him to pay attention to the battlefield and tells him that some men have fallen before all the others. At that precise moment, sounds of explosions began to be heard coming from the direction of the battle. This froze the monsters and demons in place, who tried to understand what was happening. When the smoke from the explosions clears a little, a man is standing on a pile of corpses. Arashi turns to them and greets the newcomers kindly. The demons notice that several young people have descended before everyone else and have already entered the battle. Arashi looks at his enemies without the slightest fear, as if he were simply going to warm up. The demons call the boys stupid. They cannot believe that the hero candidates decided to come out of hiding of their own accord. After his words, a powerful explosion rang out. Arashi stretches out his arms and declares that he doesn't care who is in front of him, monsters or demons. He orders them all to come towards him together because he hopes it will help him have some fun. However, Arashi and his team alone are not enough to completely protect the wall from the enemies. Some demons pierced the wall and dug a passage through it. Ordinary soldiers are much weaker than demons, so a single blow is enough to repel several people. One of the monsters strikes down a soldier lying on the ground with an axe. However, before it can strike, a blue flash crosses the air. The monster collapses dead in front of the soldier. The man looks up and can't believe his luck. Mito managed to get down from the wall and neutralize the enemy before delivering the decisive blow. However, many other demons have breached the walls and are now heading towards the leader. The man turns around and commands his sword to extend, after which the weapon increases considerably in size. Thanks to the blessing, Mito's eyes begin to shine. Thanks to his elongated sword, the old man only needs one blow to neutralize several monsters. The man wasn't entirely sure he would succeed, but as he contemplates his new sword, Mito is convinced that his power continues to grow. The class representative turns to his classmates and tells them that they are capable of defeating their enemies and asks them not to be afraid to challenge them. Mito showed them by his example that they were capable of fighting and the boys were imbued with his energy. The man understands that this is the moment when he can no longer hesitate, so he rushes into the heart of the battle. Mito cannot afford to make a mistake, because if he is scared, his classmates will be scared too, because he is the class representative. He remembers how it all ended when he gave in and trusted naive thoughts, and he will not let that happen again. Hashimoto joins the fight using his telekinesis and declares that they will not abandon the village leader and that they will fight by his side. Nagase also engages the enemy using the Blessing of Fire. Kanzaki stays slightly back and uses his control on the monsters that have breached the defenses. The whole class began to work in a coordinated manner, drawing energy from each other. Under such pressure, the monsters begin to flee the battlefield. The shocked soldiers watch the hero candidates fight and realize that their strength is such that they have begun to repel the Demon King's army. Henry also takes part in the battle and orders the boys not to retreat and to fight to the last man. The man himself, accompanied by his knights, sets off in pursuit of the fleeing monsters. A lot of time has passed since the start of hostilities. Only Digress' army and the hero candidates remained on the battlefield. Even Arashi seems exhausted, but he is clearly delighted to have been able to exert himself. Mito and the others contemplate the bodies of the defeated monsters and catch their breath. Amelia raises her sword and shouts that the Demon King's army has retreated and that victory is theirs. The soldiers began to shout with joy. The sun had already begun to disappear behind the horizon, as if to indicate that their fight was over for today. Mito didn't look inspired and was gazing pensively into the distance. Henry approached the old man and asked him how his first combat experience was going. Mito says he's still not very good at fighting crowds because he forgets to give orders. The commander pats the man on the shoulder to reassure him and congratulates him on the work done, stating that they could not have done it without his help. Henry warned them to be careful because today they were fighting demons from the middle and working classes. This man claims that there are not many superior demons, but that their power is terrifying. Mito keeps his eyes fixed on the horizon. He states that they will be ready for any eventuality. We are transported to the enemy's lair and find ourselves near the tower. The enemy army camp was located all around. The demon responsible for the attack reports to his superior and apologizes for not having fulfilled his duty. The main demon clenches his teeth tightly, overwhelmed by anger. This demon is called the Elemental King of Earth. He is the commander of the Demon King's army and one of the 4 heavenly kings. We are then transported to the west of the sacred land of Digress. To the west lies a large forest. Shinjo finished all his business in the small town and began his journey. The man thinks that the exit from the forest is very near, which means that the house of the great sage is not far away. As Shinjo walked along the path, he had the feeling that someone was watching him. It was at that moment that strange tentacles emerged from the bushes and rushed at the man. Shinjo managed to lean back, which allowed the tentacles to pass by him without touching him. Even though the man moved quickly, the tentacles were just as fast, so the distance between them was small. As he carefully observed the tentacles passing in front of his nose, Shinjo thought they resembled long tongues. The man looks in the direction from which the threat was coming. A large monkey is hanging upside down from a nearby tree, its tongue as long as a frog's. 2 monsters have already descended to the ground and are slowly approaching the brunette. Shinjo activates his blessing and discovers that the monster is called a gibbon. Thanks to his status, the man understands that the creatures are hungry, after which he throws his heavy backpack to the ground. Shinjo carries only a dagger because he is convinced that these creatures pose no threat to him. The monster's mouth drools and it roars. The next moment, the gibbon attacks Shinjo with its tongue. The man manages to dodge the attack without difficulty. However, as soon as he was distracted for a second, the gibbon was already dangerously close. Before the monster could hit him with its paw, the boy jumped to the side. Shinjo is not satisfied with the current situation. He did not expect these monsters to be so fast. Step by step, the gibbon's blows force Shinjo to retreat further and further. One of the monsters decides to attack the guy again with its tongue. This time, instead of dodging the blow, Shinjo positioned the dagger so that the beast's tongue struck the blade itself. The gibbon screamed in pain when its tongue was cut in 2. Shinjo, taking advantage of the monster's confusion, moved towards the gibbon and continued to cut out its tongue. Howling in pain, the monster tried to push away the approaching man with a swipe of its paw. The man dodged the blow and said the monster was too slow. With a single stroke of his dagger, Shinjo felled the monster. The gibbon collapses, dead on the ground, and Shinjo turns to the others. The monsters halted their attack in horror and looked at the man with apprehension. Shinjo asks why they are frozen in place and if he should go see them himself. After a while, the forest falls silent again. Shinjo faced all the monsters and thought that every time he encountered increasingly dangerous creatures, he encountered new ones. The individual believes this could be due to the fact that the Demon King's lands are already nearby, or to the absence of a city harboring adventurers nearby. The brunette continues on his way, and remembering the monster's abilities, realizes that they are no longer young, and therefore there is no stronger hunter in this area. Finally, Shinjo emerges from the forest and stops in front of the cliff. Before his eyes appear the Urkano Mountains, a natural barrier protecting the country from a large-scale invasion by the Demon King. The highest mountain is called the Mountain of the Death Wolf. According to rumor, it is at this place, at the very top of the mountain, that a wise man lives. Shinjo descends to the foot of the mountain, where, according to rumor, there is a village. As the street lights up with a scarlet sunset, the boy approaches the village. However, what appeared before him made him uneasy. The village that once stood at the foot of the mountain is now engulfed in flames. Shinjo believes they are being attacked by the Demon King's army and rushes to their aid. The man runs through the village and looks around him. After a while, Shinjo notices a small group of demons. They bend over the murdered villager. Shinjo observes the scene from the roof of one of the houses and thinks he has underestimated the enemy. The demons turn to their leader and ask him what they should do next, suggesting they kill all the villagers. A demon named Hector orders them to stop because people can be used as slaves. The commander then asks them if they have managed to obtain any information about Elaban. One of the demons claims that according to the locals, Elaban lives at the top of the Wolf of Death Mountain. Apparently they already knew, but they decided to check, so Hector said they were wasting their time. Looking up at the mountain, the commander declared that their priority was to capture Elaban Kellet, known as the Sage. Hector orders a halt for the night so that they can set off again at dawn. One of the demons, frightened, declared that fearsome wolf and wolves lived on this mountain. The demon claims that it will be impossible to subdue them, so you will have to kill them all to reach the top. These wolves possess a highly developed intelligence, which is why their magic is ineffective against them. The demons claim that the 4 heavenly kings can even subdue a dragon, but they are no match for them. Hector says he's not good at magic either, so this conversation is pointless. They will therefore kill these wolves if they cannot subdue them. The demons roared with enthusiasm after his words and prepared to spend the night. Shinjo analyzes the enemies and thinks they are very organized. He surmises they are part of the Demon King's elite army. The man discovers that their leader is a high-ranking demon and deduces that there are only 10 high-ranking demons in the enemy army and that a frontal attack would be a bad idea. Shinjo had completely relaxed, so much so that Hector could notice that someone was watching them. However, when the chief turns his gaze towards the house, the man is no longer on the roof. Hector is confident, so he orders the demons to search the entire village and find the spy. Shinjo jumps off the roof, thinking the demon is very intelligent. The demons are screaming at the man to come out and roam the city. Meanwhile, the brunette takes refuge on another rooftop and thinks they are out of luck, because hiding is his specialty. As Shinjo walks through the village in search of shelter, his gaze is drawn to something on the side. In the middle of this crowd of monsters are several bound villagers, including children. Shinjo turns his back on them and pretends not to notice anything. The man jumps over the fence and lands on the ground. The brunette feels compassion for the villagers, but saving them is pointless, as her goal is to find the wise man before the demons. His only chance is to climb the mountain earlier, and the fact that the demons stayed in the village all night will help him in this endeavor. Night fell, and Shinjo continued his ascent towards the highest and most dangerous peak of the Urkano Mountains. Because the wall is very steep, in some places the man has to climb it. From time to time, Shinjo turns around and looks behind him to make sure he is not being followed. However, behind this man, there is only a steep wall. Shinjo explains that he probably won't find a marked path and will therefore have to follow the tracks of animals. Visibility is poor and the ground is soft, so the driver cannot accelerate because it is a place where extreme caution is required. As Shinjo crosses the forest, he begins to notice the presence of strangers. The boy barely noticed them, and he concluded that he had stumbled upon the fearsome wolf and wolves. With each step, Shinjo notices that there are more and more wolves. But despite this, they leave almost no trace. They have the situation perfectly under control. Suddenly, the howl of the pack leader echoes through the mountain. As if on command, wolves emerge from the bushes, ready to tear Shinjo to pieces at any moment. The boy jumps in the air, dodging the wolf's sharp teeth. Shinjo jumps into a tree, hoping to buy time to assess the situation. He personally encountered the creatures that gave the mountain its name, the Mountain of the Death Wolf, and now understands why most of those who dared to climb it never return. Having taken a comfortable position, Shinjo activates the Blessing of Evaluation. He scans the pack of hungry wolves, searching for the leader. The aptitude chart indicates that wolves possess the ability to work as a team. One of the wolves decides he can't wait any longer and rushes towards the tree where Shinjo is sitting. The monster hits him headfirst, breaking the tree trunk. The tree is leaning dangerously and Shinjo with it. A man catches a leaf as it flies by. He decides to strengthen it using a miraculous power. When Shinjo finds himself dangerously close to the monster's mouth, he throws a reinforced leaf towards the wolf. The small leaf became so imbued with power that it was able to cut off the beast's head. After that, a white glow began to emanate from Shinjo. The creature collapsed dead behind the man. The other wolves were already prepared for the attack and decided to attack from different sides. Shinjo strikes the approaching monster, sending it flying to the side. On the other side of the man, the wolf sees this and tries to slow down. But it is too late, and his companion hits him. In one fell swoop, Shinjo managed to neutralize two wolves. They lay unconscious on the ground, blood flowing from their mouths. The rest of the pack does not dare approach the stranger with such nonchalance. Shinjo looks at his hand and thinks that he didn't expect the improvement to have such an effect. He remembers Leonora's words that the hero candidates rely on blessings and know nothing of miraculous power. That's why she could control them all at the same time, thanks to her enslavement technique. While dodging the attack, Shinjo reflects on the need to control this miraculous power and improve his physical performance in order to be able to withstand the magical attacks of his opponents. This power is not as impressive as a blessing, but it is one of the ways to become stronger in this world, which means that time will not be wasted. Another wolf that attacked him was stabbed in the torso with a dagger. Shinjo considers practicing his miraculous powers as he reaches the summit. After driving off the wolves, the boy finally found what he was looking for. With lightning speed, Shinjo approached his target, overtaking the other wolves. Stopping near the largest wolf, Shinjo realized that it was the leader of the pack. The other wolves began turning their heads in different directions, trying to find where the boy had gone. The pack leader did not wait for his comrades and rushed to attack. Shinjo easily dodged its attack and injured the wolf. Some time passes while the man fights with the pack, after which he looks toward the dense forest. After the leader's death, the remaining wolves withdrew, which caused Shinjo some unease. Wiping the blood off his dagger, the boy thought they had made good practice targets. Shinjo gave chase to the wolves and in the blink of an eye, caught up with the rest of the pack. While pronouncing his blessing, the brown-haired man realized that the wolves were moving in a strange way. Shinjo seems to perceive the wolf's intangible spirit changing trajectory. The man dodges the ghost and spots one of the wolves moving in exactly the same direction as it. It looks as if the wolf is following its own shadow, which precedes it by a few moments. While Shinjo observes his movements, another ghost appears on the other side. The man turns around, thus increasing the distance between them. Shinjo places the dagger in front of the ghost's mouth and waits. A second later, a wolf appears at that exact spot and lunges at the weapon. The wolf does not have time to change direction and meets its death. After that, Shinjo convinces himself that he can predict all their actions a second in advance. The rest of the pack no longer wishes to attack the brunette. They want to hide and survive. However, the man clutches a dagger in his hands and orders them to stop. With shining eyes, Shinjo approaches them and suggests they train a little longer. After a while, night gives way to day. Shinjo walks away from the place where he brutally slaughtered all the wolves in the pack. After a successful training session, the young man decides to use a blessing to assess his abilities. The guy had his weaknesses highlighted with an increase in the evaluation level, and this time the same thing happened. This man understands that all his abilities are, in one way or another, linked to vision. Shinjo sits down on the ground and tells himself that he is finally quite tired, so he decides to rest, since the summit is soon near. Suddenly, a rumble echoed through the mountain, making the man shudder. He assumes that the Demon King's army is already close. After picking up his belongings from the ground, Shinjo sets off again, as he no longer has time to rest. Meanwhile, a battle rages at the foot of Deathwolf Mountain. Hector looks at the young girl who is standing up to the whole squad and says that the elf is very tenacious. But this does not surprise him, because the young girl with white hair claims to be a disciple of the wise man. The elf is injured, but does not lose her fighting spirit. Hector says it's time to end this, so he orders the demons to kill her. The girl with heterochromatic eyes, one green, the other blue, clenches her teeth and says she can't take it anymore at this rate. One of the demons approaches her and prepares to deliver a fatal blow. The girl is so weak that she is unable to parry the blow, so she closes her eyes. However, the blow never took place because Shinjo arrived in time and, lifting the girl in his arms, jumped to the side. The elf didn't have time to understand how this happened and now looks at his savior in surprise. Shinjo remains silent and assesses the situation, while the girl notices that he is human. The demons stare at the man, unsure of his identity, assuming reinforcements have arrived. Shinjo observes the squad with his eyes, trying to decide what to do in this situation. The squad consists of 10 soldiers from the Demon King's army and a superior demon, their commander. Shinjo lets the girl get up, and she asks him why he saved her. The brunette places her behind him and asks her if she is a student of the wise Eleban. The young girl admits, embarrassed, that it's exactly like that. Shinjo explains that this is the reason for his help because he has some business to settle with the sage. The man turns his gaze towards the young girl and manages to assess her abilities. She is a half-elf and possesses magical skills. Hector says he doesn't care about that guy because all human beings are their enemies. He orders his subordinates to act without change and to kill them all. Shinjo believes that to gain the sage's favor, he must save this girl. The man takes out his dagger and prepares to fight a dozen demons. The enemies surround them and target Shinjo first. A white glow reappears around the brunette. The man decides to develop his predictive abilities. At that precise moment, a ghost appeared before him. Shinjo jumps to the side and already spots another shadow approaching from the opposite direction. The guy dodges the spear attack just as effectively. Another ghost appears behind them, ready to strike with a mace. As the monster follows the ghost's trajectory, Shinjo intervenes and stops the attack. The man grabbed the monster by the wrist, freezing it in place. The demons who had previously attacked the boy do not understand what is happening. All their attacks are useless because the guy anticipates them before they can even approach him. Shinjo explains to the demon that the mace is a good weapon, but that it should not be used against humans. With a few quick blows, the man killed 3 demons who were standing nearby. The rest of the team observes the scene from the side, unable to move from their place. Thanks to his foresight, Shinjo will not lose in hand-to-hand combat, but he does not know how long this effect will last and how much time he has left. Hector orders his subordinates not to approach the man, but to attack him with magic. The demons begin to form pentagrams in accordance with the leader's orders. They activate the magic balls and clusters of dark energy emerge from the pentagrams, heading towards Shinjo. The brunette understands that he has no defense against such an attack, since it is a magical technique. Suddenly, the elf's voice was heard behind him, ordering the bullets to scatter. She invokes Sylph, the spirit of the air, after which a wall of wind appears before the boy and girl. The tornado swirls around Shinjo and the elf, protecting them from attacks coming from all directions. Time passes and the magic fades. Shinjo surmises that this technique is known only to elves and that it borrows the power of spirits. The man asks if it's magic, and the young woman thanks him for allowing her to buy time to restore the strength of her spirit. Hector loses patience and draws his sword, declaring that he will deal with them himself. Shinjo finally waited for the big boss to show up, which is why he called the elf. The young girl approaches him and asks him what he is doing. Shinjo asks him to take care of the small fish so that he can kill their commander himself. The girl says she can put up with it, but asks him to stop calling her that because she has a name. Shinjo nods and throws his bags off his shoulders. With a single gesture, the guy approaches Hector and says he trusts the girl. Shinjo activates his blessing and prepares to get rid of the supreme demon. The girl shouts back that the boy is once again addressing her incorrectly, because her name is Maya. A moment later, a metallic sound was heard. Hector blocks Shinjo's attack without difficulty. Using the large sword as a support with his foot, the man jumps to the side. Once on the ground, Shinjo begins to analyze the situation. However, Hector has no intention of waiting and raises his sword above the man again. Blow after blow, they repel each other's attacks. The demon is angry, so he takes over and repels Shinjo. The brunette senses that he cannot cope with the attacks and begins to panic. Dodging the attack once again, he exposes himself, thus offering an opening to the demon. Shinjo himself understands this, but unfortunately, it is already too late. Hector raises his sword above him and strikes. Shinjo attempted to dodge to minimize the damage. The demon stated that he did not expect such a quick reaction from this man. Despite this, he still managed to hit Shinjo and wound him in the side. Finally, the man understands what the higher demons are, because without this foresight, he would already be dead. Hector, rubbing his chin, said he was sorry, because if this man had not been human, he would have had a chance to defeat him. Despite his injuries, Shinjo has no intention of retreating. Assessing Hector's abilities, The boy realizes that he is too strong to attack him head-on. In this particular case, Shinjo decides to win by using a trick. Maya covered Shinjo's back while he prevented Hector from getting any closer. The demons stood behind their leader and awaited his orders. Shinjo examines the information concerning the Supreme Demon once again. While he tries to analyze the situation, Hector enters the fray. He rushes at Shinjo, letting out a piercing scream. The man carefully monitors each of its movements and observes the moving ghost. Shinjo sees which way the blow is coming, so he jumps to the side. When the sword follows a predetermined trajectory, the man is no longer there. The way Shinjo dodges attacks makes Hector even more furious. He continues to unleash a flurry of blows, increasing his speed so that his opponent has no time to react and dodge. The next attack was so fast that the sword struck Shinjo's hand. The man understands that his prediction is useless, because the gap between them is too large. The demon begins to find the situation amusing and asks how much longer the man will escape him. Shinjo understands that he has no choice, so he takes out his weapon. He fires 3 shots at the demon, who seems surprised. However, Hector is so fast that he manages to cover his head with his hand. Shinjo did not expect the demon to be able to defend itself against bullets. However, the man fires 2 more shots and, taking advantage of the demon's confusion, shoots him in the knees. Hector grimaced in pain and asked what this new Templar weapon was. The demon realizes he can no longer remain still and rushes towards Shinjo. The man does not move and waits for Hector to approach. Shinjo fires the final blow. Hector dodges and declares that it's useless because he already knows where the bullets will fly. Shinjo retreats because he has run out of ammunition. He takes throwing knives out of his cloak and throws them towards Hector. The demon manages to deflect the attack with a sword strike. When Hector turns his gaze towards Shinjo, he notices that the boy is throwing something strange at him. The demon doesn't have time to recognize the mysterious thing. The only thing he can do is freeze and wait to see what happens next. Shinjo wants to take advantage of Hector's ignorance about the things of his world. The demon takes a step to the side, avoiding a collision with the unknown. The can falls to the ground next to his feet. The next moment, a powerful explosion occurs, engulfing Hector in flames. The demons begin to call out to their captain in anguish. However, they are stopped by Maya, who orders them not to move. The young girl is determined to help Shinjo because much more than her life depends on it. However, the young girl still has doubts about the man's true identity. Although he is human, he is capable of fighting a superior demon. Shinjo gripped the dagger more comfortably. There were no more bullets, and that was his last grenade. When the smoke clears, Hector can be seen, furious, who was not seriously injured by the explosion. The demon's skin was only slightly burned, so he said that Shinjo possessed a strange weapon. Hector, letting out a cry of anger, rushes towards Shinjo. In the blink of an eye, it disappears from its previous location. Shinjo circles around him and tries to dodge his attacks. This man understands that he has no other choice but to use all his abilities to the maximum. Shinjo fully utilizes his abilities and focuses on the enemy's movements. This time, he seems to see several ghosts. They mimic each other's movements, uniting to form a more distinct figure. Shinjo activates his weakness display ability. A beam of light appeared right in front of his eyes, indicating the ghost's weak point. This line is centered on the neck of the great demon. Shinjo sees the opportunity and is preparing to attack. In the blink of an eye, he spots his target and wounds Hector in the neck. Out of breath, Hector asks how this could have happened. Shinjo finally manages to defeat a formidable opponent. This guy thinks that anticipating and exposing weaknesses is very effective, but the strain on the body is enormous. As he savored his victory, his body suddenly trembled, and he realized his strength was failing him. The boy falls to his knees before the defeated superior demon and remains unable to move. The demons watch in shock as their captain is defeated by a human. They notice that the guy is exhausted and decide to take care of him quickly. Maya knows her morale is at its lowest, but Shinjo protected her, so she must help him. The demons begin to surround their captain's assassin when a voice is heard, ordering the spirit of fire to burn them. The demons are engulfed by a huge flame, burning their enemies alive. The enemies try to extinguish the fire, but they fail. They beg for mercy and plead to be saved, but there is no help to be found. Shinjo turns his head and realizes that the power of the fire is far greater than that of the flames of Nagase. An elf approaches them from the side and apologizes to the girl for being late. Maya looks at the young girl with admiration and considers her a mentor. Shinjo looks at them and realizes that he has finally met the great sage. Standing before him was the beautiful elf Elabana. The young girl smiled and thanked the man for saving her student. She looked at Hector, lying on the ground. She observed with interest both the demon and Shinjo kneeling. The man confirms her statement and asks her if she is the wise woman of Eleban. The young girl says he's right, even though she considers herself more like a pile of old bones, retired. Even though Shinjo is unable to make an assessment at the moment, he can say without it that the girl is strong. With his current powers, he is no match for her, so he decides that honesty is the best strategy. The elf observes the man who has stood up and assumes that he wants something from her. Shinjo says she has very good intuition. The young girl replies that it was logical, and since she owes him for saving her student, she will help him if she can. Maya suggests arriving at the house first, as the place is permeated with the smell of blood, so the wolfen won't keep you waiting long. Elabana agrees with her and invites Shinjo to follow them to rest. The brunette had no intention of resisting, so he meekly followed the elves. Shinjo realizes that risking his life to save Maya was worth it, because Elaban is now on his side. They finally reach the top of the mountain, where a small rickety house stands. Elabana invites Shinjo in, telling him to make himself at home, while Maya goes to wash up. The man enters the house and asks why they decided to settle here. Elabana replies that there are many reasons, but the main one is that she is tired of the world's worries and that, even now, many people are looking for her to use in their plans. Shinjo understands that the girl chose this place because few people can access it. Elabana states that only true talents like Shinjo can achieve this, and therefore she will gladly welcome anyone capable of doing so. When they were seated facing each other, the elf repeated his question about what he had to ask him. Shinjo decides to speak directly and reveals that he is looking for a way to return to his original world. Elebana seems more suspicious and questions the man again. Shinjo explains that he comes from another world and was summoned here as a hero candidate to destroy the Demon King. The girl said she had heard rumors that a third generation of hero candidates had been summoned to their world. The man learns for the first time that they are third generation. He remembers Leonora saying that they weren't the first people they had approached. Elebana explains that every 5 years, Digris launched a call for applications for heroes. The first and second generations were completely defeated by the Demon King's army, and from that moment on, summoning was taboo. However, Saint Leonora had the courage to try a third time, despite the fact that Elebana herself opposed the idea. Shinjo claims that he too was against this idea, and that is why he killed Leonora, so that she would never dare to do it again. Elebana smiled mockingly and did not believe that Shinjo could defeat Leonora. Shinjo laughed softly and said that there are many ways to kill someone, even if the opponent is stronger than oneself. Elebana says she believes the guy at his word and laughs at the idea that Leonora was killed by her own pawn. The girl understands the boy's desire to go home and says that she doesn't like long conversations. She suggests he get straight to the point and informs him that his magic is unable to send Shinjo back to his world. The man is initially shocked by his own words. Then he sighs sadly and asks her if she knows how they can get home. Elebana explains that people possessed a summoning technique, but the original was lost and no one thought about this aspect of the problem. Shinjo claims that Leonora told them the same thing, which means that they really have no other way back than to defeat the Demon King. Elebana approaches the shelf and declares that this boring technique is among the magical techniques of demons. The man finishes his drink and declares that he now has his eyes fixed on his next objective. The girl regrets not being able to help the boy, but she promises to try to find a solution. However, Elebana states that in her opinion, this boy has every chance of defeating the Demon King. Shinjo sighed and said it was too much work to undertake. However, if they have no other choice, he will do everything he can. His gaze made Elebana sweat profusely, and she thought to herself that there was something strange about this guy. Compared to other candidates for the role of hero, there seems to be a cold, bottomless emptiness in him. Shinjo gets up from the couch, thanks her for her help, and asks Elebana if she discovers anything, to pass the information on to him through the Adventurers Guild. The young girl watches over him and doesn't know if she can really trust Shinjo. After that time, Maya had already taken a bath and had gone out into the living room. The young girl changed her clothes and with a smile declared that she felt invigorated. Maya sat down on the sofa and asked Shinjo if he wanted to take a bath after the long climb up the mountain and the deadly fight. The man acknowledges that she is right and accepts the proposal. Elebana interrupts their conversation and declares that she has a proposal to make to Shinjo. The boy and girl looked at Elebana in surprise and asked her what kind of proposal it was. The elf asked Shinjo if he wished to take his student with him on this trip. Maya was jumping up and down, asking if they were talking about her. Elebana confirms her suspicions and tells Shinjo that with Maya, he will be able to achieve his goal faster. The girl looks at the boy, waiting for a response. Shinjo rubbed his head and said he refused to take such a noisy lady with him. After some time, we find ourselves in the eastern region of the demonic kingdom of Valdora, near the front line with the holy kingdom of Digris. Two figures can be seen in a vast field. Shinjo looks around and says the weather is pleasant, despite having been told that the demon realm has a harsh climate. Maya claims that these lands once belonged to a sacred kingdom, but the further inland you go, the worse the climate becomes. Shinjo surmises that these lands may have been occupied by the Demon King's army. The girl recounts that originally a great city, Neuthrat, was located on the western slope of Mount Urkon, but that now it is occupied by demons. They are heading towards that very city and will arrive there in about 2 days. Shinjo guesses the answer, but still asks what happened to the inhabitants of Neutrath. Maya recounts that half were killed and the other half enslaved, but that some managed to cross the mountains and escape. Shinjo understands that the girl is very upset about this subject, so he decides to end the conversation. Looking at the girl, the boy understood that it was not in vain that he had brought her with him, because she had been able to tell him many things. He remembers refusing Maya's company at the chalet at the top of the mountain. The young girl then became angry and declared that she didn't need him either. Elebana laughed at their quarrel and said that Shinjo refused too soon, since he hadn't been in their world for long, and Maya knew a lot. The man said that even if it were true, he didn't understand what advantage she would gain from leaving with him. Elebana approached Maya and patted her head. The elf said that the girl was still very young and had not seen the world, that she had gotten all her knowledge from books and had not applied it to experience. Elebana had long wanted to send the young girl on a trip, but she liked her too much to send her alone. Shinjo reminded him that the girl could go on a trip with him alone, and that she wouldn't have to force him to keep her. Elebana explains that even though she looks young, her strength is already beginning to decline, and she will therefore not be able to undertake a long journey. And then by a happy coincidence, Shinjo arrived and, out of pure kindness of heart, he saved Maya. The young girl turned away embarrassed and murmured that she was grateful to him for saving her. Shinjo warns her that he is going to the Demon King's realm and that it will be dangerous there. Therefore, if she gets in his way, he will leave her. Elebana sits down next to Maya and declares that the last word belongs to her because it concerns her life. After these words, the young girl sat up straight and joy shone in her eyes. At that moment, Maya finally decided to hit the road with Shinjo. The young girl no longer seemed as inspired, but followed Shinjo with a dragging step, constantly repeating that she was tired. The man sighed in disappointment and reminded them that they only had 1 day left on the road. Maya reminds him that she is a mage, not a swordswoman, and therefore not as resilient. The man patiently stood there, waiting for the girl to stop complaining and move on to something else. Shinjo, feeling sorry for the girl, throws down his backpack and declares that they will rest here today. The young girl seemed to sense a trap and asked him why he had made this decision, since he had previously stated that he would leave her if she became an obstacle. Shinjo replies that the girl is talking nonsense, because if he had wanted to leave her, he wouldn't have taken her with him from the start. While emptying his backpack, the boy told the girl to start setting up the tent. When night falls, the boy and girl have already gathered wood and lit a fire, warming themselves by the flames. The young girl ate the bread with pleasure and watched the flames with interest. Shinjo had silently observed the inspired young girl until that moment. The man decides that Maya needs to know that this journey will be very dangerous. Shinjo is willing to risk his own life if it can help him get home, but the girl has no reason to take risks. The man is certain that Elebana did not lie to him about the purpose for which she sent the young girl with him. However, he decides to ask Maya if there is another reason why she accompanied him. The girl stops eating and says she didn't know how to start this conversation, but Shinjo understands her immediately. Maya reveals that she was born in an elven village destroyed by the Demon King's army. Shinjo believed that demons only fought humans. However, Maya claims that they do not care who they kill, and that they therefore killed her entire family, her father, her mother, and her younger brother. The girl survived only because her father diverted attention to himself, and Maya was forced to helplessly witness the whole scene. When the army left, the young girl had no choice but to die in the forest, but her mentor found her, after which Maya became his student. Shinjo says he's not interested in his past, he wants to know his purpose. The young girl explains that she decided to become a magician and accepted her mentor's offer because she wants to acquire the power to kill demons. She remembers everything Elebana taught her during those 10 years spent by her side, training with all her might. Maya is doing all this out of revenge, She wants to kill with her own hands those who took her family from her. Shinjo asks the girl if she knows the name of the demon who killed her loved ones. Maya claims that this was done by Weinberg, one of the 4 celestial kings of the demon army, the king of the wind. Shinjo assumes that the girl accompanied him to find this demon, but he reminds her that there is no need to enter into open conflict with him now. Maya says that so far her mentor has refused to let her go, but he has allowed her to accompany him. She doesn't know the reasons for such an act, but she is certain that Elabana has her own opinion on the matter. They will therefore travel together for a while. Shinjo nods and says he believes the girl at her word. At the time of their departure, Elabana stated that she trusted Mayu Shinjo, as he would be able to control her if necessary. If the young girl had traveled alone, she would have quickly died seeking revenge. Maya apologizes to Shinjo and explains that the conversation proved too difficult. The girl assures the boy that she has no intention of dragging him into her problems. The boy understands that she wants to do everything alone, so he simply tells her that it's time to go to bed, because they have to get up early. Maya heads towards the tent and announces that she will leave the spirit guardians to watch over the monsters. While they were already lying down, after a while, Shinjo woke up and sat up. He thinks back to Maya's words concerning the 4 kings of the Demon King's army. He is pulled from his thoughts by a grunt coming from his side. Maya fell into a deep sleep, and nothing could disturb her slumber. After a long period of solo travel, the man is no longer used to thinking in a noisy environment, so he decides to go outside. Shinjo thinks these kings will be stronger than the demon he fought the other day. The man looks at the starry sky and tells himself that he must become even stronger. Shinjo shakes his head and says he has no reason to worry about it at the moment. As morning approaches, we are transported to the western border of the sacred kingdom of Digris, to Fort. After the last attack, the enemy did not move. A military meeting is being held in one of the main rooms of the fort. One of the meeting participants is trying to draw attention to himself because he has already repeated the same thing several times. He believes it is high time for the hero candidates to go on the offensive. Another man said he understood his point of view, but asked what exactly they intended to attack. Before he could answer, Amelia pointed at the map. The girl believes they must retake Fort Aris, as it originally belonged to them. Moreover, this is a strategically important point for the enemy. By capturing Aris, they will therefore force the demons to retreat. Henry says it's too dangerous, because so far they've only been defending themselves. The man who speaks first starts laughing at the captain of the 8th Squad, saying that he was scared. Henry looks at him reproachfully when the man asserts that the hero candidates are under their direct command. Amelia argues for an attack, claiming that the enemy should have lowered their guard by this point and therefore does not expect them to attack first. The girl turns to the class representative and asks him if the hero candidates are ready for this fight. Mito agrees and declares that they will go into battle as soon as the girl gives the order. At the end of the meeting, Mito, Hashimoto, and Heinrich leave together. Henry sighs and says that Amelia is in too much of a hurry since the perception is scheduled for tomorrow. Hashimoto asks the village chief if everything will be all right, because everyone seems confident about it, but there are other aspects to consider. Mito replies that he sees nothing wrong with this plan, since it is better to attack now while the enemy recovers from his injuries. Henry claims that their superiors rely too heavily on their strength, and that is why they insist on attacking. Hashimoto does not seem satisfied with the answer, but she knows they have no choice. Henry says he will support them with all his might, but the boys are the main attacking force, so they should rest for the night.